During a blizzard on the mountain farm, my 3 children evacuated all valuables, but left me behind with the pets. The eldest son stood by the car, coldly uttering, "Someone must stay and guard the house." The youngest hurriedly grabbed a hammer, driving 6 nails to seal my underground bunker door from the outside. They even cut off all power and heating before driving away. I sat silently in absolute darkness as the -28-degree cold tightened. I only smiled because no one knew they had just handed me the key to take everything back. Thank you for being here with me today. Before we begin, I'd love it if you'd drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone you loved? Just yes or no. Your honesty truly matters here. This story includes some fictional details to convey the emotional truth, but the lesson is what I hope stays with you. I was 69 years old, the morning my 3 children decided the antiques in my living room were worth saving more than I was. The blizzard warning came 3 days before it hit. I was standing in the kitchen of my 300-acre farm in the Rocky Mountains when the phone rang. The automated message said winds would reach 80 miles per hour, temperatures would drop to -25°C, and mandatory evacuation orders would take effect within 48 hours. Julian called 15 minutes later. My eldest son, 42 years old and a real estate investor who'd been struggling with debt for the past 3 years, didn't ask where I planned to evacuate. He asked about furniture. Dad, about the blizzard. Are the antiques still in the living room? The mahogany cabinet, the paintings. I looked out the window at the January sky, already gray with incoming weather. They're fine, Julian. I'm more concerned about, "We'll be there tomorrow to help you prepare," he said, and hung up before I could finish. Rex. My 8-year-old golden retriever with a graying muzzle watched me set the phone down, with the kind of attention dogs reserve for moments when something is deeply wrong. Dusty, my 6-year-old gray cat, who normally hid when strangers visited, stayed pressed against my leg for the rest of the afternoon. I'm a retired federal geological engineer. I spent 35 years reading mountains, assessing disaster risk, understanding how systems fail under pressure. When Julian asked about antiques instead of evacuation plans, something shifted beneath my feet. They arrived the next morning with a rental truck. Julian directed operations from the porch, while my youngest son Connor, 32 and working freelance construction, carried Vera's mahogany cabinet through the doorway. My daughter Brenda, 38 and married to Preston Morales, walked through the house with studied casualness, touching picture frames and opening drawers. "Just being practical, Dad," Julian said when I asked what they were doing. "If the roof collapses, at least Mom's things will be safe." Preston, 40 years old, and a senior banker, moved through my farm with the detached efficiency of someone conducting inventory rather than helping family evacuate. He loaded the television, then Vera's paintings, then the grandfather clock her father had built by hand 50 years ago. "Where did you keep the photo albums?" Brenda asked from the hallway. "The ones with the land deed documentation." I watched from the kitchen window as everything my late wife had loved disappeared into the back of that truck. The clock, the cabinet, even the small porcelain figures she'd collected over 40 years of marriage. Julian supervised every box, checking items off a list he pulled from his jacket pocket. By noon, the living room was empty. By 1 o'clock, the truck was gone. You need to understand something about a federal geological engineer who spent 35 years reading mountains. We notice when the ground shifts beneath our feet. We notice when pressure builds in places it shouldn't. We notice when a system is about to fail. I noticed evacuation. Morning arrived cold and clear. I walked outside at 6 a.m. expecting to leave with my family. The black Ford Expedition was parked near my underground bunker entrance. 3 rows of seats, 7 passenger capacity. 2 seats in the back row were empty. Julian stood beside the driver's door, hands in his pockets, his face cold as mountain stone. Connor leaned against the passenger side. Brenda sat in the middle row next to Preston. They were all watching me, Someone has to stay and guard the house, Julian said. His voice carried the same tone he'd used when explaining why he needed to borrow money 5 years ago. Reasonable, logical, final. Looters hit empty properties during evacuations. It's most reasonable for you to stay. I looked at those 2 empty seats. There's room right there, Julian. Rex and Dusty can't come to the hotel, he said. You understand. I understood something, but it wasn't what he meant. Connor walked toward me carrying something behind his back. The bunker's safest, Dad. Soundproof walls insulated. You'll be fine. The underground bunker was my emergency shelter. I'd built it myself 20 years ago, concrete walls, reinforced door supply storage. It could hold 4 people comfortably for a week if maintained properly. Connor walked me to the entrance. Rex followed at my heels. Dusty was already inside, pressed into the corner like she knew what was coming. I stepped through the doorway. Connor pulled a hammer from the truck bed behind him. The first nail went through the door frame with a sound like a gunshot in the January morning. Rex looked up at me. I've worked with disaster risk for 35 years. I know when a storm is coming, and I know when something else is coming with it. The second nail, the third, each strike echoed in the concrete room. 4, 5, 6. 6 nails driven from the outside, sealing the door shut. Connor's breathing was loud in the cold air. I heard him walk away, boots crunching on frozen snow. Breakers off, Preston called from somewhere near the house. Heating too. Let's go. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't arrive hot. It arrives cold, precise, with the sound of a hammer driving the 6th nail into your daughter's doorframe. The SUV engine started. I stood watching through the small window near the bunker entrance as red taillights moved down my driveway. The vehicle that could have held 7 people disappeared slowly down the mountain road, growing smaller until it vanished completely at the tree line. Rex and Dusty were standing next to me. The temperature was already dropping. I could see my breath in the pale morning light. Then I heard the soft click of the main breaker shutting off. The bunker went completely dark. In absolute darkness, at 10,000 feet, with the temperature dropping toward -28°C, my training as a geological engineer became the only thing standing between me and a death my children had carefully arranged. I stood motionless for 30 seconds after the breaker clicked off. The bunker had no windows, no emergency lighting, no cracks where moonlight might seep through. Just blackness so complete I couldn't see my own hand. Air first. Sealed room, 8 by 10 feet, 9-foot ceiling, 720 cubic feet. Oxygen capacity for 3 mammals roughly 48 hours before carbon dioxide became critical. The door seal wasn't perfect. Maybe 60 hours total. Temperature second. Concrete walls insulation factor, R25. External, -28. Internal would drop 1 degree per hour without heat. Maybe 14 hours before hypothermia risk became severe. I found the storage cupboard by memory, pulled out old blankets Vera had stored here. Wool. I put on every winter layer I could find in the dark, 5 over my chest, 3 pairs of socks, 2 sets of gloves. Rex pressed against my legs. I sat down and felt Dusty climb onto my chest, settling where body heat concentrates. Rex lay beside me, then shifted his full weight across my thighs. Good boy, I whispered. Stay right there. Your body temperature is 38.5 Celsius. I need that more than you know. Rex's normal temperature. Dusty's slightly higher. Together with my declining heat, we formed a closed thermal cycle. Not sustainable indefinitely, but enough to extend survival time significantly. I wrapped blankets around all 3 of us and settled against the wall to wait. Time moves differently in absolute darkness. I counted seconds, then minutes, using my pulse as a metronome. 7 p.m. became 8, became midnight. Do you know what happens to the human mind after 7 hours in absolute darkness, with only animal breath for company? It clarifies. It calculates. It decides. At 2 a.m. my phone rang. The sound jarred through the silence. Rex lifted his head sharply. I fumbled for the phone, saw Connor's name, pressed answer. Hey, Dad, did the snow get through the windows? Connor's voice was casual. Ruin the leather furniture. Connor, I'm in the... Click, dead air. I sat holding the phone, watching the screen's glow fade to black. Rex pressed against my chest. I could feel his heartbeat through 5 layers of clothing. Connor had called to ask about furniture. Not if I was alive. Not if I was warm. Not if I needed help. Furniture. I set the phone down and resumed counting seconds. At 6 a.m., I heard the wind weaken. The howling dropped to intermittent gusts, then silence. Rex was still on my chest. Dusty still curled around my neck. I looked up at the invisible ceiling and smiled for the first time, not because I was safe, but because I had just decided what I would do next. We have plenty of time, I whispered. All the time in the world. At 3 p.m., 19 hours after Connor drove that last nail, I heard footsteps outside. Mr. Caldwell, a man's voice official. Lake County Sheriff's Department, doing property checks after the storm. I'm here, I called through the door. The door is sealed. Silence. Then let me get that door open for you. Metal scraped metal. A crowbar working into the gap. The first nail came free with a sharp crack. Then the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. The door swung open, and daylight flooded in so bright after 19 hours of darkness I had to close my eyes. Sheriff Thomas Whitfield, 45 years old, with gray at his temples, and 20 years of mountain law enforcement in his face, stood holding a crowbar. He looked at me, then at the doorframe. 6 nail holes, driven from the outside, all the way through. His eyes moved from the door to my face. Rex stood beside me, Dusty in my arms. The sheriff's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Complete understanding without a word exchanged. Thank you, Sheriff, I said, stepping into the light. The storm was worse than predicted. These were driven from the outside, Sheriff Whitfield said quietly, touching one nail hole. Before the storm hit, I met his eyes and said nothing. He nodded once, then walked back to his patrol truck without another word. 2 hours later, the black Ford Expedition came up my driveway. Still packed with Vera's antiques. Still carrying the grandfather clock and mahogany cabinet and paintings. Julian climbed out, first hammer in hand. He walked to the bunker door and examined the 6 nail holes. Then he pulled 6 nails from his jacket pocket, fitted each back into its hole, and yanked them free one by one with the hammer's claw. We locked the door from the outside to protect you from burglars during the chaos, he said, not looking at me. Emergency situations bring out the worst in people. Don't be dramatic, Dad. There are 6 nails, Julian, driven all the way through the frame. Necessary precaution. He dropped the last nail into his pocket. The bunker was the safest place during a severe blizzard. You should be thanking us. Watching Julian pull those 6 nails from the doorframe was like watching a man erase fingerprints from a murder weapon, while the detective stood 3 feet away, taking notes no one could see. Brenda helped unload 3 boxes back into the house. Connor carried the television. Preston supervised. They stayed for an hour talking about the storm and road conditions, and how lucky we all were that nothing serious had happened. That night, I sat in the kitchen with Rex and Dusty, listening to my children discuss the farm plan in the living room as if I weren't there. I wasn't angry anymore. I opened Vera's old notebook, the blue one she'd used for her garden records, and started writing the date, the time, the temperature. I had plenty of time. How do you make 3 people who think you're weak believe you're becoming weaker? 2 weeks after Sheriff Whitfield pried open that bunker door, I'd filled 30 pages of Vera's blue notebook with dates, times, temperatures, and exact quotes. Connor arrived on a Tuesday morning, asking about the farm's future plans. Dad, have you thought about what happens to the farm? He asked, standing in the kitchen doorway. Long-term plans. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Rex lay at my feet, watching Connor with the attention dogs reserve for people they don't trust. Well, I was thinking, I said, letting my words slow slightly, might talk to that lawyer in Louisville. Or was it, Lewis, no, the town near here. Connor's eyes sharpened. You mean Leadville, Dad, where we've lived for 40 years. I blinked twice, looked confused. Leadville, yes, that's the one. The mistake was calculated. Leadville was where I'd bought supplies every week since 1977. Where Vera and I had our 30th anniversary dinner. Where I'd registered every geological survey for the federal government over 3 decades. I knew that name better than my own children's birthdays, but Connor didn't know that. He nodded slowly, something like satisfaction crossing his face. You should rest more, Dad, he said. The blizzard was hard on you. Maybe we should talk about simpler arrangements for the property. Maybe, I said, and looked out the window at nothing in particular. Connor left 10 minutes later. I watched him walk to his truck, pull out his phone before he'd even reached the driver's door. He stood on my porch with his back to the house, speaking into the phone with the kind of animation that suggested excitement, not concern. I stood behind the kitchen door and listened through the crack. He couldn't remember Leadville, Connor said, voice bright with something that wasn't worry. The town he's lived next to since 1977. Just kept saying Louisville. No, I don't think he's faking. He looked genuinely confused. Pause. Julian speaking on the other end. This might be easier than we thought, Connor continued. Yeah, much easier. I'll keep visiting weekly, document the decline. We'll need records for the guardianship petition. He hung up and drove away. I poured myself another cup of coffee and smiled at Rex. Each time I appear more confused, I said quietly, they'll become more careless, more audacious, more exposed. This is the only strategy that can win. You need to understand something about strategy. The most powerful weapon is the one your enemy doesn't know you're holding until it's already too late to run. 1 week later, I drove to Leadville, to the law office I'd known how to find for 40 years. Garrick Townsend, 65, civil attorney, and Vera's closest friend for 30 years, opened the safe in his Leadville office and pulled out documents his late friend had prepared 5 years before her death. His office occupied the second floor of Leadville's oldest brick building shelves, running floor to ceiling filled with land surveys and estate files and the accumulated legal history of Lake County. Lesterton, Garrick said as I walked in. I'm glad you finally came. Vera made me promise to wait until you were ready. She said you'd know when that was. I sat in the worn leather chair across from his desk. She knew something like the blizzard would happen. She knew your children, Garrick said quietly. That was enough. He opened the safe behind his desk, extracted a document bound in blue legal paper, and placed it between us. The date stamp read April 2010, 7 years ago, 5 years before Vera died. She called it a land trust with care obligations, Garrick said. Read the relevant section. I read aloud. Farm ownership transfers to Lester Caldwell if children violate care obligation defined as abandonment, neglect, or actions endangering his physical safety or well-being. My hands were steady on the paper. The blizzard. 24 hours locked in. Perfect proof, Garrick agreed. But I advise gathering more. One event they might explain away: freak accident, miscommunication, their word against yours. A pattern becomes impossible to deny. Multiple documented violations with witnesses evidence a timeline showing intent rather than error. He pulled out a yellow legal pad, began writing. What you need: dates, times, witnesses, physical evidence, photos, recordings if possible, documentation of their financial dealings with the property, any forged signatures, unauthorized transactions, insurance changes. Insurance, I repeated. Check your policies, Garrick said. People who lock fathers in bunkers often have financial motivations beyond real estate. I left his office at dusk, carrying a photocopy of the land trust. The document felt light in my hands, almost weightless. But Vera had designed it to carry the weight of everything. Driving back to the farm in darkness, I processed what I'd learned. 2010. She created this before I retired, before she got sick, before any of us knew what was coming. Vera saw clearly what I'd refused to see, that our children had stopped being children years ago. They'd become something else. Something that calculated value and risk and return on investment. Grief hits differently when you realize the person you're grieving loved you more carefully, more strategically than you ever understood while they were alive. I remembered Vera at our kitchen table in 2010 working on what she'd called garden paperwork. I'd asked if she needed help. She'd smiled and said no, she was just making sure everything would grow properly after she was gone. She wasn't talking about roses. The truck's headlights caught Vera's photograph on the dashboard, our 30th anniversary, her in the blue dress. She loved me in the tie she'd given me for my 60th birthday. She was smiling in that photo, but her eyes held something I understood better now. Not sadness, preparation. I don't believe in luck, she used to say. I believe in preparation. She was right, as always. I drove back to the farm in the dark, with the photocopy on the passenger seat, Vera's photograph keeping watch from the dashboard. The land trust was dated 2010. Vera had died in 2015. She'd spent 5 years ensuring I'd be protected from children she loved, but understood better than I did. The house lights were on when I pulled into the driveway. Julian's car was parked near the barn. Through the kitchen window, I could see all 3 of them, Julian, Brenda, Connor, sitting at Vera's table, papers spread between them. The envelope from Rocky Mountain Comprehensive Insurance arrived 3 months after the blizzard, and I knew immediately I had never signed anything with that company in my life. I didn't walk into the kitchen that night when I saw them at the table. I stayed in the truck, waited until they left, then went inside to find the farm office desk drawer open and papers rearranged. Someone had been looking for something. 6 weeks later, organizing that same desk drawer on an April evening, I found what they'd been searching for. The envelope was tucked beneath old tax returns, cream-colored paper, corporate logo addressed to me. Rex lay at my feet as I opened it. Policy effective date: October 15th, 2016. 3 months before the storm. Comprehensive accident and disability coverage. Death benefit $1.5 million. Insured Lester Caldwell. I turned to the signature page. The name was spelled correctly. The letters were in approximately the right positions. But the L in Lester looped wrong. I'd signed my name for 69 years. This wasn't mine. Someone forged my signature, I said quietly to Rex. Someone who had access to my documents. Someone who lives in this house. Beneficiaries: Julian Caldwell, Brenda Morales, Connor Caldwell. Equal distribution upon insured's death or permanent total disability. I read that phrase 3 times. Permanent total disability. I turned to page 7. Special provision 7B. In event of permanent total disability as defined by Social Security Administration or persistent vegetative state as certified by licensed physician, benefit payout $3 million. $3 million for disability. $1.5 million for death. Death paid half what disability paid. I sat very still, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Not from fear, from understanding. The blizzard wasn't designed to kill me quickly. 24 hours in a freezing bunker could cause brain damage, hypothermia complications, cognitive impairment, severe enough to meet disability criteria. They needed me alive but incapacitated for maximum payout. That's why Connor called at 2 a.m. asking about furniture. He was checking if I was still conscious, still coherent enough to answer. Monitoring whether the exposure had caused the right kind of damage. Insurance fraud. Forged signature. $3 million. My children had put a price on my incapacitation, and it was exactly twice what my death was worth. I picked up the office phone and called Garrick. "Send me a photo of that signature page," he said after I explained. "I'll compare it with your file documents." I heard papers rustling on his end. 30 seconds of silence. "Confirmed." Garrick said, his voice cold. That's not your handwriting. The pressure points are wrong, the angle is off. Someone practiced your signature but didn't quite match the original. Why disability instead of death? Because disabled you can't contest, Garrick said slowly. Can't hire lawyers, can't fight back. They get $3 million and a father who can't remember their names. Lester, this is beyond abandonment. This is premeditated insurance fraud. And that policy date, October 2016, means they planned the blizzard 3 months in advance. There's a waiting period on these policies. They timed it. I hung up and stared at the policy for a long time. Rex's breathing was steady at my feet. Outside, spring snow fell across the farm Vera and I had built together. 2 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in June, all 3 children arrived together. Rare occurrence. Julian carried a manila folder. Preston had his briefcase. Brenda looked nervous. "Dad, we need to talk about formalizing arrangements," Julian said, sitting at the kitchen table. The same table where Vera used to plan her garden. Just a simple agreement. For everyone's peace of mind while we're working in other cities. He pulled out a printed document. Family Responsibility Agreement. Legal letterhead I didn't recognize. It outlines your voluntary management of the farm property, Julian continued. Confirms you're maintaining everything. Protects everyone. Makes things clear if anything happens. I took the document with slightly shaking hands, deliberate tremor carefully calibrated. Read slowly. Let my eyes drift across lines without apparent comprehension. Continuous, possession, and maintenance, I read aloud, stumbling over the word. What does that mean again? Preston leaned forward with exaggerated patience. Maintenance, Mr. Caldwell. It means you're taking care of the property. Very simple. Connor watched me with barely concealed anticipation. Brenda twisted her wedding ring, not quite meeting my eyes. I'd sent this document to Garrick 3 days ago. He'd analyzed it for 4 hours, then called me back laughing. The phrase, continuous possession and maintenance of property, triggers Clause 9 of Vera's land trust, Garrick had explained. It confirms you as sole legal manager with children having no interference rights. They're asking you to sign a document that eliminates their legal standing while they think it secures their control. Sign it. Sign it with your real signature. Make it binding. I looked up at Julian with practiced confusion. Where do I sign? Bottom of page 3, Dad. Julian's voice held satisfaction. I signed with a shaky hand, performance not reality. My actual signature legally binding, triggering the land trust clause they didn't know existed. There, Julian said after I set the pen down. That wasn't so hard, was it? Now we all know where we stand. Watching them celebrate my signature was like watching someone nail their own door shut from the inside and hand you the key. They just didn't know it yet. Brenda hugged me goodbye. Connor shook my hand. Preston nodded formally. Julian squeezed my hand a little too tightly, as if to remind me who was in control. I smiled and thought, good. Keep thinking that way. They left in Julian's car, all 4 of them talking animatedly through windows I could see from the porch. Probably discussing how smoothly the signing had gone. How confused I'd looked. How manageable I was becoming. I stood on the porch until their taillights disappeared at the tree line. Rex sat beside me. The June evening was warm, nothing like that January night when they'd sealed me in darkness. I walked back inside to Vera's blue notebook and added the date, the document name, the signatures. The insurance policy copy was already filed in the safe deposit box Garrick maintained. The forged signature photographed and authenticated. The responsibility agreement now triggered land trust protections they didn't know existed. I had 9 years ahead of me. 9 years to maintain the performance. 9 years to let them grow confident, careless, greedy enough to make the final mistake that would cost them everything. I looked at Vera's photograph on the mantel, our 30th anniversary, her in the blue dress. Thank you for seeing clearly, I whispered. Outside the farm Vera and I had built stretched 300 acres into the Rocky Mountain twilight. It was worth protecting. and I had everything I needed. Patience is not the same as inaction. Sometimes patience is the most violent thing you can do to people who expect you to break. Summer 2017, 3 months after they'd watched me sign that agreement, I began the work. Not the work they expected, the real work. Garrick and I sat in his office reviewing the evidence inventory. 6 nails in a labeled plastic bag, each one tested and confirmed to have my DNA from blood where I'd scratched at the bunker door. Door frame repair invoice with photographs showing the holes. National Weather Service mandatory evacuation notice. Sheriff Whitfield's incident report from the rescue. The insurance policy with its forged signature. The responsibility agreement they'd made me sign. This is a foundation, Garrick said, logging each item into his safe. Now we build on it. For 9 years, I would do 4 things in parallel: upgrade the farm, preserve evidence, maintain the performance, and wait for them to make mistakes. The farm first. Small renovations that summer, new well pump, roof repairs, road grading. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would alert them. When Julian visited in August, I asked him 3 times what month it was. He left satisfied. Fall 2017, I replaced the cabin's foundation. Spring 2018, new guest facilities. Summer 2018, improved access roads. Each improvement documented receipts, filed photographs, dated. The children visited quarterly now instead of monthly, too busy with their own lives to pay close attention to their confused father. By year 3, the farm was worth $1.2 million. They didn't know because they stopped asking. They assumed I was just maintaining, not building. Rex's muzzle turned silver. Dusty moved slower, sleeping more in the warm patches of afternoon sun. I documented everything in Vera's blue notebook, not just the evidence against my children, but the life I was building without them. Julian came for Thanksgiving 2020, year 4. Walked through the property, barely glancing at the renovated structures. "Place looks the same, Dad," he said dismissively. "You managing okay out here by yourself?" "Sometimes I forget which day it is," I said, letting my voice waver slightly. "Is this Tuesday?" "It's Thursday, Dad. Thanksgiving." He left the next morning. "You want to know how to hide a fortune from people watching you every day. You make them believe you're too confused to understand what a fortune is." By year 6, 2023, the property appraisal came back at $2.1 million. I showed the document to Garrick in his office. "They have no idea," I said. "They see the old man and the old cabin. They don't see what I've actually built." "Keep building," Garrick said. "Vera's land trust gets stronger every year you improve the property under your sole management." Year 7, 2024, Garrick introduced me to his daughter, Elena Townsend, 28, environmental documentation specialist, and Garrick's daughter arrived with professional drone equipment to map the farm property. She said it was for conservation easement documentation. Actually, it was for evidence. "Mr. Caldwell," she said at our first meeting, setting up survey equipment on the porch. "Dad mentioned you might need property boundaries confirmed for legal purposes." I showed her the geological survey maps I'd created in 1985 when I worked for the federal government. Maps showing topography, water tables, and something else I'd never disclosed to anyone. "There's a mineral deposit under the western quadrant," I said quietly. "I mapped it 30 years ago. Never told anyone. Not even Vera knew the full extent." Elena's eyes widened. "How much?" "Enough that if anyone knew, this property would be worth $4.2 million instead of $2.1. She ran the drone surveys for 3 weeks. Came back with footage that made Garrick smile for the first time in months. "There are fresh vehicle tracks in the restricted forest section," Elena reported, showing me the aerial photos. "Someone's been accessing your western property without authorization. Recent, within the last 6 months. And look at this." She pointed to clearings where trees should have been. "They've been logging," I said. "Illegally," Elena confirmed. "On land they don't own, without permits, selling timber they have no right to harvest." I added it to the notebook. Page 147, 9 years of documentation. November 2025, year 9. A Saturday afternoon. All three children plus Preston arrived together, unusual coordination that meant something had changed. Julian stood by the fireplace in the living room, confident in a way I hadn't seen since before the blizzard. Dad, we have incredible news. Alpha Corporation wants to purchase the farm for $2.8 million. Luxury resort development. It's a fortune. Brenda touched my shoulder with practiced gentleness. You wouldn't have to manage this big property anymore. We found a beautiful assisted living community in Denver. You'd be so much more comfortable. Preston, always the banker, cut to business. We've handled the negotiations to spare you the complexity. All that's needed is your signature. Very straightforward. They'd been negotiating for months, behind my back, selling property they didn't own to a corporation that didn't know the full value of what it was buying. Watching them place that contract on the table was like watching someone offer you a knife to cut your own throat. Except they'd handed me the knife 9 years ago, and I'd been sharpening it ever since. Preston opened his leather portfolio, removed the contract, placed it on the coffee table before me. The signature line was highlighted in yellow marker. Bold. Unmistakable. Demanding. I picked up the pen with a slightly shaky hand, a performance perfected over 9 years of practice. Looked at the document, squinted, patted my pockets. Where are my reading glasses? Connor found them on the mantel, handed them to me with barely concealed impatience. I put them on slowly, picked up the contract, began reading the first page aloud, stumbling over words like someone half my intelligence trying to understand terms beyond his comprehension. 2.8 million. That's a lot of money. But let me read this carefully. Vera always said to read contracts carefully. Julian's smile said this will be easier than we thought. I flipped to page 2, read slowly, flipped back to page 1, asked what pursuant meant, asked what heretofore meant, asked if I needed a lawyer. You don't need a lawyer, Dad, Julian said smoothly. We had our attorneys review everything. It's perfect. Outside, the first snow of year 9 started to fall. Connor looked at his watch for the 3rd time. Rex lay in the kitchen doorway, watching. I smiled and turned to page 3. There are moments that end waiting, not because you choose them, but because they choose you. 2 days after I'd sat at that table reading their contract, Connor returned. He didn't knock, just walked through my front door at 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning, with a stranger carrying a leather portfolio and measuring tape. Keith Brennan, mid-30s, interior designer contracted by Alpha Corporation, measured the Caldwell farmhouse with professional detachment, while Connor hovered like the property was already his. The whole western section could be luxury cabins, Connor said, gesturing through the window toward forest I'd protected for 40 years. My father doesn't use that land anyway. Perfect for high-end clients. Brennan measured doorways, photographed angles, made notes on a tablet. Structural integrity looks solid. Bones of the place are good. We'd keep the main cabin as lodge headquarters. I stood in the kitchen doorway, performing my familiar confusion. Are you the man who fixes the furnace I didn't call for repairs? It's just an assessment, Dad, Connor said without looking at me. For when you sign the contract. Rex watched from the kitchen, old now at 17, silver muzzle and stiff back legs. Dusty hid under the couch, just her tail visible. Brennan moved through the living room, measuring ceiling height, testing floor stability. Connor followed close, talking about renovation budgets and demographic studies and return on investment. Using terms he'd learned from Preston, probably. Acting like Julian. Playing investor. Rex emerged from the kitchen, walked slowly toward the stranger in his house. Barked twice, not aggressive, just protective. The way dogs protect the people they love. Connor snapped. Turned fast, walked straight to his truck, parked in my yard. Came back carrying a wooden surveying stake, 3 feet long, one end pointed. Swung it hard across Rex's right hip. The crack echoed through the room. Rex yelped, high sharp, the sound of a 17-year-old dog who didn't understand what he'd done wrong. His back legs buckled. He stumbled against the coffee table. Get out, Connor shouted. You're dirtying the luxury hardwood floor these people are paying for. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Caldwell, that might not be. Connor kicked the sofa leg hard enough to send it scraping 6 inches across the floor. Dusty scrambled out from underneath, hissing, fled to the bedroom. Both animals out, Connor said. Now, this is a professional assessment. I stood at the kitchen window, watched everything, memorized every detail. Rex limping toward me, Connor breathing hard, Brennan looking down at his tablet like professional detachment could erase what he'd just witnessed. 9 years of patience can evaporate in the 3 seconds it takes to swing a wooden stick at something you love. They finished measurements 20 minutes later. I helped load equipment into Brennan's truck, still performing the confused elderly man who needed things explained slowly. Connor laughed about something as they drove away, his voice carrying through the open truck window. I walked to the yard, where Rex sat in fresh snow, favoring his right hip. Silver muzzle against white ground, breath coming in small clouds, tail wagging slowly when he saw me coming. I knelt beside him in the cold. My knees cracked. The snow soaked through my jeans. Rex licked my hand. "I'm sorry, boy," I whispered. "I should have stopped this sooner. I thought I needed more time. I was wrong. They had left me in a blizzard to die. They had forged my signature on insurance documents. They had taken Vera's furniture while she was barely cold in the ground. But this striking a 17-year-old dog who had saved my life by lying on my chest for 24 hours in a frozen bunker, this was different. "It's done," I said quietly. "We're finishing this today." I helped Rex inside, got him settled on his bed with water and food. Dusty emerged from the bedroom, pressed against Rex's side. I watched them for a minute. Then I grabbed my truck keys and drove. 2 miles down the mountain road, I pulled into an empty turnout where cell signal was clear and no one could overhear. Called Garrick's direct line. He answered on the first ring. "Lester, the plan is shortened," I said. "We move now." Silence for 2 seconds. Then, "I understand." "How soon?" Connor just struck Rex with a wooden stake, kicked Dusty across the room. "They think they own this place already. I'm done waiting." "Agreed," Garrick said. No hesitation. No questions about whether I was certain. He'd been expecting this call for 9 years. "Let me confirm the evidence inventory." I heard papers rustling on his end. "File 1. Garrick said, voice shifting into lawyer mode. "Land trust violation. Blizzard abandonment documented with 6 nails. DNA evidence. Sheriff Whitfield's testimony. Responsibility agreement. They made you sign triggers. Clause 9 confirms you as sole manager. Eliminates their interference rights. Property improvements over 9 years prove competent management. Unauthorized Western property access documented by Elena's preliminary surveys. File 2, he continued. Insurance fraud. Forged signature on $3 million disability policy dated October 2016, 3 months before Blizzard. Handwriting analysis complete. Proves premeditation. File 3, Garrick finished. Criminal unlawful detention of vulnerable adult. 6 nails driven from outside bunker-sealed power and heat-cut -28 degrees mandatory evacuation in effect. Sheriff witness. Weather service records. Medical assessment of hypothermia risk. 3 files. 3 children. 3 separate legal weapons that would destroy them in 3 completely different ways. Sequence, I asked. Land trust first, Garrick said immediately. Terminates their inheritance rights, establishes you as sole owner. Insurance fraud second, threatens Preston's banking license, exposes conspiracy. Criminal case we hold in reserve as leverage if they fight the first 2. Timeline. Elena can have full drone survey done by Thursday, Garrick said. If they've been cutting trees or accessing restricted forest zones, we'll have photographic evidence by Friday. I'll prepare land trust termination papers. We can file Monday. I looked out at the mountains through the truck windshield. Snow falling again. Same mountains I'd looked at the morning Connor drove those 6 nails. Do it, I said. Lester, Garrick said quietly. I'm sorry about Rex. Vera loved that dog. She loved a lot of things they didn't respect, I said. Time to make them pay for all of it. I drove back to the farm as the sun set behind the mountains. Rex was waiting on the porch when I arrived, still limping, but tail wagging. Dusty sat beside him, keeping watch. Garrick's last words stayed with me. Elena can be there Thursday with the drone. If they've been cutting trees or accessing restricted zones, we'll have documentation by Friday. I knelt and scratched Rex behind the ears, careful of his injured hip. 2 more days, boy, I whispered. Then we show them what happens when you hurt the things that saved my life. Elena Townsend launched the drone at 7:30 Thursday morning from the western boundary of my property, and by 7:47, she had documented evidence that would end my children's claim to this land forever. I stood beside her truck, watching the monitor, as the drone ascended above the 200-year-old pine canopy. Professional survey equipment covered the tailgate, GPS units, thermal cameras, tablets displaying real-time coordinates. The land trust specifies environmental easement on western quadrant, Elena said, adjusting camera angles. No logging, no road construction, no mineral extraction, without written consent. I'll document current conditions. Those pines were here when I bought this property in 1977, I said. Vera and I used to walk through there every autumn. Altitude 50 meters, camera active. Starting grid pattern survey now. The drone moved in systematic sweeps. Dense green canopy filled the monitor, unbroken forest exactly as it should look. Then the screen showed something else. Mr. Caldwell, Elena said quietly, zooming the camera. There's a cleared section, multiple trees down. These are professional cuts. I counted stumps on the monitor. 40 trees arranged in a grid, each cut precisely at ground level. Fresh wood visible even from altitude. The clearing formed a perfect rectangle within the protected easement zone. Fresh road access. Elena continued tracking along a bulldozed path. Maybe 3 months old. Leads directly to weight are those mineral survey stakes. Red and white stakes dotted the clearing in systematic intervals. Professional geological markers. The kind Alpha Corporation would use for extraction site preparation. Someone's been accessing your property for mineral extraction planning, Elena said. Without authorization, within the protected easement. She piloted the drone lower, capturing the clearing from 6 angles. Each photo showed coordinates, timestamps, elevation data. 40 trees, 200 years old. Cut down in 3 months. Environmental easement violated. Inheritance terminated. Game over. Sending all images now, Elena said. 47 photos total. GPS coordinates show everything is within the protected zone. My phone buzzed 47 times in 90 seconds. I called Garrick from my truck while Elena packed equipment. Elena found 40 trees cut down, I said when he answered. Professional logging, access road, all within Vera's environmental easement zone. Silence for 3 seconds. Then Garrick's voice came back tight with satisfaction. Clause 12. Environmental easement violation terminates inheritance rights immediately. No appeals, no exceptions. Lester, this alone is sufficient. We don't need anything else, but we'll use everything anyway. How soon can you file? Monday morning. But they don't know we have this yet. Let them keep thinking they're winning. 10 days later, I was in the farm kitchen making coffee when Brenda's voice came through the radio. Chloe Ramsey, 30-year-old host of Leadville Community Radio's afternoon program, conducted the interview with Brenda Morales using sympathetic questions and leading prompts without knowing she'd been handed a carefully scripted performance. Mrs. Morales, thank you for sharing your family's difficult story, Chloe said. Tell our listeners, when did you first notice changes in your father's decision-making? Brenda's voice came through tearful, practiced. He's giving away land that's been in our family for generations, to strangers, an animal rescue organization. My children, his grandchildren, will have nowhere to go when their lease expires this winter. I turned up the volume. Rex lifted his head from his bed. And you've tried talking to him about keeping the property and the family, Chloe prompted. He won't listen, Brenda said, voice breaking on cue. He talks to his dogs more than he talks to us. I'm worried about his safety, about whether he's being manipulated by outside interests who see a vulnerable elderly man with valuable property. The interview continued for 8 minutes. Brenda painted a picture of concerned children protecting their declining father from exploitation, of family heritage destroyed by senility and manipulation, of grandchildren left without legacy. Chloe asked leading questions. Each prompt invited more sympathy, more public support. Brenda's final statement was delivered with perfect timing. I just want people to know we love him. We're trying to protect him. Sometimes family has to make hard decisions to keep loved ones safe. I turned off the radio. She just made this public, I said to Rex. In front of the entire town. She doesn't understand what that means. I called Garrick. Did you hear the radio interview? Every word, Garrick said. Brenda just invited the whole town to watch this game. Brenda thought she was throwing stones at me from behind a wall. She didn't realize she'd just torn the wall down and invited everyone to watch. They brought this into the open, Garrick continued. That's good for us. Public exposure means public accountability. They chose the public arena, so the public arena is where they'll be destroyed. Timeline. Hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. District Court open to public. They filed guardianship petition yesterday claiming you're mentally incompetent. That radio interview was their opening move, building public sympathy before the hearing. And our opening move, we file land trust termination Monday, Garrick said. But we don't make it public yet. Let them keep building their narrative. Let them get confident. Then we show the drone photos, the forged insurance signature, the 6 nails with your DNA, Sheriff Whitfield's testimony. We let them bury themselves in front of the whole town. I looked out the kitchen window at the western forest, where 40 ancient pines used to stand, where Vera and I had walked every autumn for 30 years, where my children had brought bulldozers and chainsaws, while I pretended to be too confused to notice. The radio station will replay her interview at 6 p.m., Garrick said. By tomorrow, the whole town will have heard her version. By next week, they'll hear yours. I hung up and poured fresh coffee. Rex came to stand beside me, still favoring his right hip where Connor had struck him. 3 weeks, I told him. 3 weeks, and everyone who heard Brenda cry about protecting her father will hear exactly what kind of protection she provided 9 years ago in a blizzard. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window. Outside, the first real snow of the season was starting to fall. I needed to know exactly how many people had heard Brenda's lies, and exactly how far those lies had spread through Leadville before I brought the truth. How do you destroy a man's reputation in a small mountain town where everyone's known him for 40 years? I learned the answer the week before the hearing, when Connor started going door to door with a manila envelope full of lies. 7 days before the December hearing, my youngest son walked Leadville's residential streets, carrying photocopied documents, highlighted medical terminology, and a carefully rehearsed story about his declining father who needed protection from himself. I didn't see it myself. I heard about it from 3 different neighbors who called that afternoon. Connor adopted the concerned son persona at each doorstep, worried about Dad's safety, family trying to help difficult situation that required community understanding. I hate doing this, but I'm worried about Dad's safety. He told Mrs. Patterson who'd bought eggs from our farm for 20 years. He's giving away property to organizations he met last month, forgetting where he lives sometimes. He showed the envelope contents selectively. Letters taken out of context. Passages highlighted to suggest confusion rather than calculation. Medical terms copied from websites about dementia. These are just examples of concerning behavior, Connor explained to the hardware store owner. We're trying to get him help, but he's resistant. You know how stubborn he can be. At each door, Connor lowered his voice for the final appeal. There's a hearing next week. Just want people to understand what's really happening before they judge our family. Systematic, methodical, Character assassination one doorstep at a time. While Connor poisoned my reputation in Leadville, Preston worked a different angle from his home office in Denver. He called someone willing to provide medical opinions without actually examining patients. Someone who valued compensation over ethics. Someone whose professional judgment could be purchased for the right price. Preston described symptoms I didn't have, to a doctor who didn't care. Memory loss, confusion, signing contracts, without understanding, giving away valuable assets to strangers. The doctor, I learned his name later from Garrick's investigation, agreed to prepare an unofficial opinion letter citing professional concerns about cognitive capacity requiring formal evaluation. Not a diagnosis, not an examination. Just enough medical language to make their guardianship petition sound legitimate. Of course, we can compensate you for the consultation time, Preston said smoothly. This is about protecting a vulnerable elderly man from exploitation. You know what's interesting about character assassination? The assassin always forgets that someone somewhere is taking notes. That evening, my phone rang. Harriet Davies, 72, had lived in the small house across the farm road for 35 years, and she'd kept an old laptop file for 9 years because she always knew that someday someone would need to see what her security camera had recorded that January morning. "Lester," she said when I answered. "Connor came to my door this afternoon, had an envelope full of papers about you, told me you were forgetting things, making dangerous decisions." "I heard he's been making rounds," I said. I didn't believe him. Her voice was firm. "I remember that storm 9 years ago. I saw things that morning from my window. And Lester, I still have the old laptop. The camera file from that night is still there. I never deleted it." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. "Mrs. Davies, would you be willing to bring that laptop to see Garrick Townsend tomorrow?" "I was hoping you'd ask," she said. "I've been keeping it safe, waiting for the right time. I think the right time is now." Security footage from January 2017. 9 years preserved on an old laptop across the road. Connor hammering nails. Empty SUV seats. Everything documented by a neighbor they'd forgotten to account for. 5 days before the hearing, Julian and Preston arrived at my door without Brenda or Connor. Strategy shift. Time for the mature negotiation approach. They sat at my dining room table where Vera used to serve Sunday dinners. Julian's tone was reasonable, almost kind. "Dad, we've all said things we regret. But this doesn't have to become a public spectacle. $840,000 is serious money. More than you'd spend in your lifetime." Preston placed a glossy brochure on the table. Summit Ridge Assisted Living, luxury facility, mountain views, full medical staff. "You'd have genuine security," Preston said. "No more worrying about maintaining this big property alone." The contract was already drafted. Lester signs Alpha Corporation agreement, receives 30% of the purchase price, guaranteed placement in assisted living. All legal disputes dropped. "Think about it," Julian said. "No hearing, no lawyers, no town watching us fight. Just a fair agreement between adults. We can sign tonight." I poured tea for all 3 of us, asked questions about the nursing home amenities, pretended to consider their generous offer, let them think I was wavering. Then Preston delivered the edge beneath the diplomacy. "Of course, if we can't reach agreement, we'll need to pursue formal evaluation of your decision-making capacity. The psychiatric assessment. But that becomes completely unnecessary if you cooperate tonight." Cooperate. That was the word Preston chose. Not agree, not sign. Cooperate like I was a suspect being interrogated. "That sounds like you're saying I should cooperate or face consequences, Preston," I said calmly, pouring more tea. "Did I understand correctly?" The silence lasted 5 seconds. Julian shifted in his chair. Preston's banker face didn't change. "We'd hate to pursue formal competency evaluation," Preston said carefully. "Psychiatric assessments can be invasive, stressful for everyone. But that becomes completely unnecessary if you sign tonight and we resolve this as a family. I set down the teapot, looked at both of them across the table where Vera used to serve pot roast and apple pie to these same children 30 years ago. The hearing is in 5 days, I said. Perhaps you need more time to think about what you're asking me to do. They left 20 minutes later, contract unsigned, compromise, rejected, threat, delivered, and witnessed. I sat at the dining room table after they were gone, looking at the brochure Preston had left behind. Summit Ridge Assisted Living. Private rooms for vulnerable elderly men who needed protection from their own poor judgment. I pulled out my phone and texted Garrick. They just made a public threat in my home. Psychiatric evaluation if I don't cooperate. Is the audio evidence ready? He replied in 4 minutes. From 3 hours ago, everything recorded. I looked up at the smoke detector in the corner of the dining room. The one I'd replaced 2 years ago with a model that included a recording device. The one that had captured every word Julian and Preston spoke tonight. What they didn't know was that I'd been recording every conversation in this house since the day they made me sign that responsibility agreement. 3 days before this hearing, Garrick cleared his conference table and laid out 9 years of evidence in 5 neat rows like a geologist arranging core samples before the final analysis. I'd been recording conversations since June 2017, the day I signed that responsibility agreement. Every visit, every phone call made from my house, every threat disguised as family concern. All of it saved, backed up, ready. But that was just one piece. Early December afternoon in Garrick's law office, downtown Leadville. The conference table was completely clear except for what we'd assembled. Elena stood near the window with her tablet. Yellow legal pads covered one end of the table. A timeline poster hung on the wall mapping 9 years from Blizzard to present day. Everything we have, Garrick said, gesturing to the table. Row 1, physical evidence. Row 2, digital documentation. Row 3, witness statements. Row 4, financial fraud. Row 5, legal violations. Elena placed her drone tablet beside printed photographs. 47 images, all GPS tagged, all time-stamped. The deforestation is irrefutable. I stood at the head of the table looking down at 15 years of Vera's preparation and 9 years of my own documentation. Vera started this in 2010, I said quietly. She saw what I didn't want to see. Garrick opened a small evidence box in the center of row 1. 6 rusty nails individually sealed in plastic bags with evidence tags attached. DNA laboratory report, he said, unfolding the document. Blood stains on all 6 nails match 100% with your DNA sample. Blood deposits consistent with fingernail scratching against wood surface. Epidermal tissue fragments present. Subject attempted forcible exit from interior position. I looked at those 6 pieces of metal that had sealed me inside darkness 9 years ago. I'd scratched that door for 3 hours before accepting no one was coming. My fingers bled. I wrapped them in old rags and kept trying anyway. I didn't realize I was creating evidence, I said. That's what makes it perfect, Garrick replied. You weren't performing. You were surviving. These nails prove the difference between someone choosing to stay and someone desperately trying to escape. Looking at 9 years of evidence laid out on a conference table feels different than collecting it piece by piece. Suddenly you see, it's not just documentation. It's a complete narrative of betrayal told in DNA and timestamps. Row 2 held Harriet's laptop screen showing the paused video file. January 15th, 2017, timestamp 6:47 a.m. Connor visible in frame carrying hammer. Empty SUV behind him with 2 back seats clearly visible. 19 minutes of footage, Elena said. Mrs. Davies' camera captured everything from her kitchen window. Row 3, Sheriff Whitfield's incident report from the rescue. Mandatory evacuation weather reports showing negative 28 degrees. Witness statements from 3 neighbors about Connor's defamation campaign. Row 4 made my hands clench the forged insurance signature with pressure point analysis showing it wasn't my handwriting. Policy dated October 2016. 3-month waiting period expired December 28th. Blizzard, January 15th. They planned this for months, I said, touching the insurance document. The policy, the waiting period, watching weather reports. This wasn't impulse. This was premeditated. Which makes it attempted murder, Garrick said quietly. Not abandonment, not neglect. They bought insurance on your disability, waited for the coverage to activate, then locked you in freezing conditions designed to cause exactly the kind of brain damage that would trigger maximum payout. Row 5. Vera's land trust with care obligation clause highlighted. The responsibility agreement they'd made me sign. Audio transcripts of Julian and Preston's psychiatric evaluation threat. Elena's drone photographs showing 40 ancient pines felled within the protected environmental easement, every piece connected to the next, every document supported by 3 others. No gaps, no assumptions, just evidence. The next day, 2 days before the hearing, I signed a different kind of document. Garrick placed it on his desk at 2 p.m. 50-year lease agreement with Mountain Paws Animal Rescue Organization. Annual rent $1, renewable automatically. The land is legally committed, registered, notarized, Garrick explained. No one can override this without your consent. Not your children, not Alpha Corporation, not anyone. What about the mineral deposit? I asked. The reason Alpha wants the property, Garrick pointed to paragraph 7. No mining, no extraction, no mineral rights transfer permitted under lease terms. The deposit stays buried. Forever. I signed at 2:15 p.m. We drove to Lake County Courthouse. Lease registered and notarized by 3:30 p.m. 50 years at $1 per year. Total obligation, $50. The 300-acre farm I'd built with Vera, worth $4.2 million, now committed to animal rescue for the next half-century. Alpha Corporation's luxury resort plan, impossible. Mineral extraction, illegal. My children's inheritance, terminated. At 5 p.m. back in Garrick's office, he composed an email to Desmond Wolfe at Alpha Corporation. Subject R.E. Caldwell Farm Property Status. Body text, professional, direct, no emotion. Formal notification that Caldwell Farm Property entered into 50-year lease agreement with Mountain Paws Animal Rescue, registered Lake County Courthouse, December 2025. Lease prohibits mining, deforestation, commercial development, and mineral rights transfer. Please find attached notarized contract and registration certificate. Sending that contract to Desmond Wolfe was like watching someone drill for oil only to discover the well they'd spent millions preparing for had been legally filled with concrete the day before. Garrick looked at me before clicking send. Once this goes out, everything changes. Wolfe will call Julian. Julian will panic. The hearing becomes unavoidable. When do you think Wolfe will respond? I asked. Within 12 hours. He'll open this attachment and realize he's been negotiating with my children for property that became worthless the moment you signed that lease. Garrick clicked send at exactly 5 p.m. We sat watching the confirmation appear on screen. Friday evening. Hearing Monday morning at 9 a.m. Wolfe would spend his weekend discovering that the $2.8 million deal he'd structured for months, based on mineral extraction rights my children promised they could deliver, had become legally impossible 48 hours before the public hearing, where everyone would learn exactly why. Wolfe's going to be furious, I said. Wolfe's going to sue your children for fraud, Garrick corrected. They represented themselves as having authority to sell property and mineral rights they never actually controlled. They've been negotiating in bad faith for months. I looked at the sent email confirmation on the screen. By Sunday morning, I said Wolfe will make a phone call that changes everything. By Sunday morning, Garrick agreed, your children will have lost their corporate backer and gained a very angry plaintiff. The phone shattered the silence at 7 that Monday morning, 3 hours before the hearing. Sunday had passed without word from Desmond Wolfe. I'd spent the day with Rex and Dusty reviewing my testimony notes, waiting. Garrick had texted at 8 p.m. Wolf opened the email. No response yet. Sleep well. I hadn't slept well, but I'd slept. Now the phone was ringing. Unknown number, I answered. This is Desmond Wolf, director of Alpha Corporation Land Acquisition. His voice was controlled, but vibrating with something underneath. 50 years old, 30 years in commercial real estate, and right now he sounded like a man who'd just discovered someone had stolen his car while he was sitting in the driver's seat. I received a rather interesting email Friday evening. Perhaps you can explain why you signed a 50-year lease for $1 per year 2 days before a guardianship hearing where your children are claiming you're mentally incompetent. Good morning, Mr. Wolf, I said calmly. I signed it because Mountain Paws Animal Rescue needed a permanent location. The timing seemed appropriate. The timing? His voice rose half an octave. You signed a lease that makes your property commercially worthless 48 hours before your children were supposed to finalize a $2.8 million sale to my company. A sale we've been structuring for 8 months. A sale your son Julian personally guaranteed he had authority to complete. I see, I said. That does sound unfortunate. Unfortunate. Now the control was cracking. Mr. Caldwell, do you understand what you've done that lease prohibits mineral extraction? Do you have any idea what's under your western quadrant? Yes, I said. I know exactly what's there. Silence for 3 seconds. We can fix this, Wolf said, shifting gears fast. Professional again. Reasonable. I'm authorized to offer $5 million cash to void that lease and finalize the original agreement. No lawsuit, no complications. $5 million, Mr. Caldwell. Deposited in your account by Friday. I poured coffee with my free hand. Let him wait 10 seconds. Not interested, Mr. Wolf. Not interested. His voice went flat. Mr. Caldwell, your children represented themselves as having legal authority to sell property and mineral rights. They accepted deposits totaling $1.2 million over 8 months. We paid architectural fees, geological surveys, environmental assessments, all based on their guarantee of ownership access. And now you're telling me you've made that impossible. I'm telling you I made a decision about my own property, I said. What authority my children claim to have is between you and them. You're sabotaging a legitimate business transaction, Wolf said, anger returning. You're hurting your own children's financial interests. Do you understand that? I could hear Wolf's breathing change through the phone, shallow, rapid, the sound of a man recalculating everything. Mr. Wolf, I said quietly, I need you to understand something. I'm a geological engineer with 35 years' experience. I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey from 1972 to 2007. I mapped this property's mineral deposits in 1985. I knew exactly what was under my western quadrant 11 years before your company discovered it. The silence on the line lasted 10 seconds, long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Then I see. 2 words. His voice had changed completely. No rage, no desperation. Cold calculation. I see, he said again. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone, watching morning light spread across the farm through the window. Rex sat at my feet. Something had just changed in Wolf's strategy, but I couldn't identify what. 2 hours later at 9 a.m. Garrick called. Lester, he said without preamble. Wolf's legal team filed an emergency lawsuit 30 minutes ago. Not against you, against Julian, Brenda, and Connor. I sat down at the kitchen table. For what? Fraud. Misrepresentation. Breach of fiduciary duty. They're suing for $1.2 million every deposit and payment Alpha Corporation made over the past 8 months. The filing alleges your children fraudulently represented themselves as having legal authority to sell property. They didn't control, accepted substantial payments under false pretenses, and deliberately concealed the existence of the rescue lease until after Alpha had invested significant capital in the project. They didn't know about the lease, I said. I signed it Friday. Doesn't matter, Garrick said. Wolf's attorneys documented everything. Every email where Julian claimed ownership authority. Every assurance Preston gave about clear title. Every contract Connor signed representing your family's interests. They built their case assuming you were incompetent and your children had legal standing. Now they realize you're extremely competent and your children had nothing. My hand was steady on the coffee cup Garrick had poured when his call came through, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. So Wolf flipped, I said, completely. He was their financial backer 2 hours ago. Now he's their plaintiff. His attorneys are good Lester. The filing has 63 pages of evidence, emails, bank transfers, signed agreements where your children guaranteed rights they didn't possess. It's a paper trail proving fraud. I looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. 9:07. The hearing starts at noon, I said. Yes. Your children are now walking into a public guardianship hearing where they're claiming you're mentally incompetent while simultaneously defending themselves against a $1.2 million fraud lawsuit that proves they're the ones who lack judgment. Wolf's attorneys sent courtesy copies to the court presiding over your hearing. Courtesy copies, I repeated, making sure the counsel knows exactly who they're dealing with before Julian stands up and claims he's the responsible party protecting his declining father. I stood at the kitchen window looking toward the western forest, where 40 ancient pines used to stand, where mineral deposits worth millions lay buried under a rescue lease that would last 50 years. Wolf wanted those mineral rights badly enough to spend 8 months and over $1 million preparing, I said. Now he's weaponizing that preparation against the people who sold him something they never owned. Your children just lost their corporate ally and gained a plaintiff with a paper trail proving fraud, Garrick confirmed. The hearing starts in 3 hours. They'll be fighting us in front of the community council while fighting Wolf in front of a judge. 2 fronts, both losing battles. The Lake County Courthouse steps were slick with December ice when I arrived at 11:45. 3 hours had passed since Garrick's call about Wolf's lawsuit. 3 hours for my children to realize they were walking into a guardianship hearing while defending against fraud charges. 3 hours to panic. The courthouse was built in 1952, low brick with narrow windows. Inside the hearing room smelled of old wood and radiator heat. Creaky wooden chairs filled the space in neat rows. A court panel sat at the front table. Ernan Keller, 68, had served as Lake County District Court judge for 14 years and knew every land dispute in 3 counties. He sat center position reading through papers with reading glasses perched on his nose. Julian, Brenda Preston, and Connor sat on the left side of the room. Perfectly dressed. Perfectly composed. Julian wore a navy suit. Brenda had chosen a modest dress. Preston carried his banker's briefcase. Connor sat rigid, arms crossed. Garrick and I sat on the right side. Harriet Davies occupied the 3rd row with a small notebook. Sheriff Whitfield stood near the back wall in full uniform, arms folded. 30 townspeople filled the remaining seats, neighbors, business owners, people who'd known me for 40 years. Vernon looked up from his papers at exactly noon. This hearing will determine the guardianship petition filed by Julian Caldwell regarding his father, Lester Caldwell, he said. His voice carried authority. Mr. Julian Caldwell, you may present your case. Thank you, Your Honor. Julian stood buttoning his suit jacket. I'll speak for the family. My oldest son looked like he'd already won. Our father is 78 years old. Julian began, voice measured and sympathetic. For the past 2 years, we've watched his decision-making deteriorate. He talks to his dogs like they're people, has full conversations with them as if they understand complex topics. A few townspeople shifted in their seats. 3 days ago, Julian continued, he signed away a 300-acre farm property that's been in our family for 50 years for $1 per year. a 50-year lease. He gave away millions of dollars in land value to an organization he barely knows. Julian's tone was perfect. Concerned son. Reasonable man dealing with difficult situation. Small-town values. We love him, Julian said, looking directly at the council. But he needs protection from himself, from people who might exploit his declining judgment. That's why we're here, not to take anything from him, but to ensure he's safe. These are serious claims, Mr. Caldwell, Vernon said. I understand, sir. That's why we've brought documentation. Brenda stood next, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The tears were real. I'd seen her practice that move since she was 16. We just want Dad safe, she said, voice breaking. We miss him so much. He won't return our calls, won't let us visit. We're worried about him being alone in that big house with winter coming. I watched my daughter cry for the father she'd left to freeze and felt nothing. Preston rose, placing a manila folder on the council table. Psychiatric evaluation Lester Caldwell was printed on the label. As a senior banker and financial professional, Preston said smoothly, I felt duty-bound to seek medical expertise regarding my father-in-law's capacity to manage significant assets. This evaluation outlines professional concerns about cognitive decline that warrant formal assessment. Vernon picked up the folder, opened it. Several council members leaned forward to read. The council will review this document, Vernon said. Many townspeople were nodding, sympathetic to the concerned children, worried about the confused old man. Connor sat silent through all of it, arms crossed, glaring at me with the same expression he'd worn when he swung that wooden stake at Rex. Before I tell you what I said about those dogs, are you still here? Comment. If you think I'll turn this around, or B, if my children will win, add one short reason why. Quick note. The next part includes some fictionalized details to convey the emotional truth. The lesson is what matters. Vernon looked at me. Mr. Caldwell, would you like to respond to these allegations? I stood slowly. Adjusted the tie Vera had given me for our 30th anniversary. Took my time. My son says I talk to my dogs, I said. That's true. Let me tell you why. Julian and Brenda exchanged glances. Satisfied glances. This was going exactly as they'd expected. The confused old man about to prove their point. 9 years ago, January 2017, there was a blizzard. Mandatory evacuation. My family left. But Rex and Dusty, my golden retriever, and my cat, they stayed with me in the emergency bunker. I paused. Let them think I was losing my train of thought. Rex was 8 years old then. He lay on my chest for 24 hours in that bunker. His body heat kept me from hypothermia when the power was cut, and the temperature dropped to -28 degrees Celsius. Dusty curled around my neck where body heat concentrates. The satisfied looks were fading. So yes, I talked to Rex and Dusty. They're not people, but they're smarter and more loyal than most humans I've met. They saved 3 lives that night, mine and their own, because they refused to abandon me even when they had the chance. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the documents Garrick and I had prepared. I'm a geological engineer with 35 years at the U.S. Geological Survey. I said, my voice shifting from storytelling to technical precision. I hold certifications in mineral assessment, land management, and environmental impact evaluation. I've conducted surveys across 7 western states. I mapped the mineral deposits under my property in 1985, 40 years ago, using federal equipment and professional protocols. I placed my CV on the council table. 35 years of credentials. The 50-year lease my son calls evidence of cognitive decline was drafted by Garrick Townsend, reviewed by 3 attorneys, notarized by Lake County, and registered with full legal standing. It protects 300 acres for animal rescue and environmental conservation. That's not confused decision-making. That's deliberate land stewardship. Garrick stood. All documents are legally executed and recorded with Lake County. I can provide copies to the council. The chairman's question hung in the air like a blade waiting to drop. Vernon picked up Preston's manila folder again, opened it to the signature page, read slowly. His expression changed. "Mr. Morales," Vernon said quietly, "which licensed physician issued this psychiatric evaluation?" The hearing room went silent. Even the radiator stopped hissing. Preston's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Vernon's eyes moved from the unsigned signature line to Preston's face, then to Julian's face, then back to the document. "Mr. Morales," Vernon repeated, voice harder now, "I asked you which licensed physician issued this psychiatric evaluation of Lester Caldwell." Preston's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out except a faint "ugh" that echoed through the silent council chamber. His hand hovered over the psychiatric evaluation like he wanted to snatch it back from Vernon's desk, but didn't dare touch it now that it had become evidence of something worse than incompetence. "Mr. Morales," Vernon said again, "I'm waiting for the name of the licensed physician who signed this document." Preston glanced at Julian. Julian's face had gone pale, every muscle frozen. "Your Honor, I was provided this evaluation by my client's family physician, and I assumed." "You assumed?" Vernon set the paper down with precision that felt like a gavel strike. "You presented a psychiatric evaluation to this council without verifying the credentials of the person who signed it. Or perhaps you knew there was no signature at all." "No." Preston's voice cracked. "I would never—" "Then you're incompetent," Vernon said flatly, "which doesn't help your client's case." Garrick stood up with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Your Honor, if I may, I have additional evidence that I believe the council needs to see before making any determination about Mr. Caldwell's mental competency or the integrity of the claims being made against him." Vernon nodded. "Proceed." "I'd like to call Mrs. Harriet Davies to present video evidence from her property adjacent to Caldwell Farm." I watched Harriet make her way to the front of the chamber, her laptop tucked under one arm. She'd been nervous this morning when I picked her up, worried about testifying against Connor and his siblings, even though she'd seen what she'd seen. But now her jaw was set with the same determination I'd watched build over the past 8 years, every time she brought me soup or asked if I needed anything from town. Garrick connected her laptop to the projection system. The screen behind Vernon's desk flickered to life, showing Harriet's driveway in grainy pre-dawn light. The timestamp read January 16th, 2017, 6:04 a.m. "Mrs. Davies," Garrick said, "can you explain what we're looking at?" "That's the camera I installed above my garage," Harriet said, her voice steady. "It faces southeast toward the road and catches part of Lester's driveway. I installed it in 2015 after someone broke into my shed. On the screen, a dark SUV sat in my driveway, its rear passenger door open. 2 figures moved near the bunker entrance, the reinforced door I'd built into the hillside behind my house. One figure was unmistakably tall and broad-shouldered. Connor. The second figure was me, barely visible already inside the bunker doorway. What happened next took 11 seconds. Connor pulled something from his jacket. A hammer. He positioned a nail against the bunker door frame. Raised the hammer. Struck. Again. Again. 6 times total, driving 6 long nails through the external frame into the door jamb with methodical precision, while the open SUV sat empty behind him, 2 vacant seats where Julian and Brenda should have been sitting, if this was really just Connor checking on his father one last time. Then Connor walked back to the SUV, got in, and drove away. The timestamp showed 6:04:47 a.m. The council chamber was so quiet, I could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. "Mrs. Davies," Garrick said, "did you witness Mr. Caldwell emerge from that bunker?" "Not for 9 hours," Harriet said. "I didn't realize what I'd filmed until Lester came to my house in 2024 and asked if I still had the footage from that morning. When I watched it back, Her voice caught. "I didn't know Connor had sealed him in. I thought Lester had just stayed in the bunker by choice during the storm." Garrick nodded. "Mr. Chairman, I have one more piece of evidence to present." When Sheriff Whitfield investigated the bunker in February 2026, he removed the 6 nails that Connor Caldwell had driven through the doorframe. Those nails had biological material on them, bloodstains consistent with someone scratching at the wood from the inside, trying to remove the nails or force the door open. He placed a sealed evidence bag on Vernon's desk. 6 long nails, their tips darkened with rust and something darker. Sheriff Whitfield sent those samples to the state forensics lab, Garrick continued. The DNA analysis came back last week. The blood on those nails is a perfect match for Lester Caldwell. I felt the room's attention shift to me, specifically to my hands. The scars on my right palm and fingertips still visible after 9 years, white lines crossing the calluses I'd earned rebuilding my farm. I'd stopped hiding them months ago. Vernon looked at Connor. Mr. Caldwell, would you like to explain why you nailed your father inside a bunker during a severe blizzard? Connor's face had gone from pale to gray. His mouth worked but produced no sound. Vernon turned to Julian. Dr. Caldwell. Julian stared at the projection screen where the frozen image showed Connor's hammer raised for the 4th strike. He said nothing. Ms. Caldwell. Vernon's gaze moved to Brenda. Brenda's eyes were closed. Tears ran down her cheeks in silent tracks, but she didn't speak, didn't deny, didn't explain. The silence stretched until it became its own verdict. Vernon gathered the papers in front of him with deliberate precision. This court will take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I expect the petitioners to provide a full explanation for what we've just witnessed, or I will refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. We're adjourned. He struck the gavel once. Nobody moved. The council members sat frozen, staring at my 3 children, who couldn't look at each other or at me or at anyone. Preston had his head in his hands. Garrick's hand rested briefly on my shoulder, steady grounding. I looked at Connor's scarred knuckles gripping the table edge. At Julian's prestigious medical degree that couldn't diagnose his own father's will to survive. At Brenda's tears that came 9 years too late to matter. The ventilation hummed. The projection screen's fan whirred softly. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. But in that council chamber, my children's silence was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The 15 minutes felt like 15 seconds before Vernon called us back inside. Everyone filed back to their seats with the slow, careful movements of people walking into a funeral. Vernon's face was unreadable, but the 4 other panel members looked grim, the kind of expression people wear when they've just discussed whether to notify law enforcement. Garrick leaned close and whispered, "They're deciding whether to call the county attorney now or wait until after the vote." I nodded, but didn't answer. My attention was on my 3 children across the aisle. Julian sat rigid, his spine so straight it looked painful. Preston stared at the table in front of him, his briefcase already closed like he was ready to leave. Brenda had shredded the tissue in her hands into confetti-sized pieces. Connor's right leg bounced rapidly, his boot heel tapping the floor in an arrhythmic pattern that echoed through the quiet chamber. Vernon struck his gavel once. "This hearing will now resume. Does either party have additional evidence to present?" I stood slowly, feeling every one of my 78 years in my knees and lower back. "Honor, one final piece." Vernon gestured for me to proceed. I turned to face the council, my hands steady on the back of my chair. My eldest son testified earlier that I volunteered to stay behind and guard the house during the blizzard. That I chose to remain in the bunker while my children drove to safety. I paused, letting the words settle. "There's one witness we haven't heard from yet, the vehicle that drove away that morning." Vernon frowned. "I don't understand, Mr. Caldwell." "Modern vehicles record audio from the cabin," I said. Connor had installed an aftermarket dashcam in the 2015 Ford Expedition, a model with interior audio capability retrieved by Sheriff Whitfield under warrant. I placed my hand on Garrick's laptop. The timestamp is 6:08 a.m., January 16, 2017. 4 minutes after Connor sealed the bunker door. The timestamp is 6:08 a.m., January 16th, 2017. 4 minutes after Connor sealed the bunker door. I pressed play. The audio quality was better than I'd expected when I first heard it in Sheriff Whitfield's office 8 months ago. Connor's baritone voice came through the projector speakers with crystal clarity, preserved in digital memory, like a confession recorded for posterity. "Lock the outside door, turn off the circuit breaker," Connor's voice said matter-of-fact, like he was reading a grocery list. A pause, then. "If anything happens to the old man, that $3 million insurance policy is more than enough for us to share. We don't have to guard this farm anymore." Static. The sound of an engine starting. The recording ended. My son's voice preserved in digital memory, confessing to my murder. No one moved for 10 seconds. The silence in that council chamber was so complete. I could hear my own heartbeat, the ventilation system cycling air, someone's watch ticking 3 rows behind me. Connor's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles bone white. Brenda stared at the floor like she could bore through it by willpower alone. Preston's banker composure had shattered completely. His face was gray, his mouth slightly open. Julian stared at the laptop like it was a weapon I'd just pulled from my coat. Vernon exchanged glances with the other 4 council members. One of them, a woman in her 50s I recognized from the hardware store, was writing notes so rapidly her pen made scratching sounds against the paper. Vernon cleared his throat. "The council has heard sufficient evidence. We will deliberate briefly." Julian turned to Preston, his whisper hoarse and carrying in the silent room. "How did he—" Preston's response was barely audible. "I don't know, but I knew." 9 years of planning. 9 years of documentation. 9 years of waiting for Sheriff Whitfield to return with a warrant and the right forensic technician. 9 years of patience. The council filed out through the side door. Garrick's hand found my shoulder again, steady and grounding. Across the aisle, my 3 children sat frozen in their chairs like they'd forgotten how to move. 8 minutes later, the council returned. Vernon remained standing, a single sheet of paper in his hands. After reviewing all evidence presented today, this council issues the following rulings. First, the 50-year conservation lease between Lester Caldwell and Lake County Rescue is recognized as a valid and binding legal agreement executed in good faith by all parties. Julian's jaw tightened. Second, Vernon continued, the psychiatric evaluation submitted by the petitioners is rejected as unsigned and without evidentiary value. The claims regarding Mr. Caldwell's mental competency are unsupported by credible medical documentation. Preston closed his eyes. Third, this council formally requests the Lake County attorney review all evidence presented today for possible criminal charges, including but not limited to attempted homicide insurance fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. Brenda's breath hitched a small sound that carried. The vote is unanimous, 5-0. Vernon's gavel came down with finality. The petition for guardianship is denied. This hearing is adjourned. People stood slowly, gathering coats and bags with the confused movements of an audience that wasn't sure if the show was really over. I sorted my documents methodically, sliding each piece of evidence back into the accordion folder Garrick had prepared. Across the room, Julian watched me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not anger, not contempt, not the dismissive superiority he'd worn for 9 years. Fear, genuine fear of consequences he could no longer control or negotiate away. "Mr. Caldwell," I turned. The woman approaching was in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back, KLC-O press badge clipped to her jacket. Chloe Ramsey had covered Lake County news for KLCO radio for 6 years and prided herself on getting both sides of every story. I'd listened to 3 of her broadcasts about my family this year, sympathetic pieces about devoted children caring for an aging father who'd become difficult and isolated. "I wrote 3 stories about your family this year," Chloe said quietly. "I think I got them all wrong." I closed the accordion folder. "You reported what they told you. That's what they count on." Her eyes moved to the laptop, then back to my face. Would you be willing to share that audio file? People deserve to know the truth. 9 years I'd waited to see that look in Julian's eyes the moment he understood he'd lost everything. And now I'd have the chance to make sure every person in Lake County understood exactly what my children had done. I handed Chloe my card. Call me tomorrow morning. I'll give you everything. The road back to the farm had never felt this long. I'd met Chloe at the courthouse steps at 7 that morning before the county attorney's office even opened, and handed her a flash drive containing every audio file, every photograph, every document Garrick and I had compiled over 9 years. She'd promised the story would air by afternoon. Garrick had stayed in Leadville to deliver the original evidence box to the county attorney's office. He was right that I needed to make this drive alone. My hands were steady on the wheel. The December mountains looked exactly the same as they had 9 years ago, when I'd walked home through the blizzard with frostbite setting into my fingers and toes. Same peaks, same road, different man. The radio played low in the background, KLCO, Lake County's only local station. I'd had it tuned there since pulling out of the courthouse parking lot. At 2:47, Chloe's voice cut through a commercial for Henderson's Hardware. We interrupt our regular programming for breaking news on the Caldwell guardianship case. I'm Chloe Ramsey, and what you're about to hear contains disturbing content related to elder abuse and attempted homicide. Listener discretion is advised. I pulled onto the shoulder. Put the truck in park. Let the engine idle. What you're about to hear, Chloe continued, her voice steady and professional, is authentic audio from a dashcam interior recording entered as evidence in yesterday's Lake County District Court hearing. The recording was made on January 16, 2017, at 6:08 a.m. inside a Ford Expedition, leaving Caldwell Farm during a severe blizzard. A pause. Then Connor's voice filled my truck cab, preserved in digital clarity. Lock the outside door, turn off the circuit breaker. His baritone was matter-of-fact, unhurried. If anything happens to the old man, that $3 million insurance policy is more than enough for us to share. We don't have to guard this farm anymore. Static, engine noise, silence. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the mountains while my son's voice, my youngest boy, the one Vera had nursed through pneumonia when he was 6, confessed to my murder on public radio. That was Connor Caldwell's voice, Chloe said, recorded 9 years ago as he and his siblings abandoned their father in an underground bunker with no heat, no power, and no way to escape. Lester Caldwell survived 9 hours in sub-zero temperatures before managing to free himself. She took a breath. I could hear the controlled anger beneath her professional tone. Over the past year, I've aired 3 stories about the Caldwell family. In those stories, I portrayed Julian Brenda and Connor Caldwell as concerned children trying to protect their aging father from financial exploitation. I reported those stories based on information provided by Brenda Morales, without proper verification or investigation. Another pause. I owe Lake County an apology. I owe Lester Caldwell an apology. The evidence presented in court yesterday reveals not elder abuse by Mr. Caldwell's supporters, but attempted homicide and insurance fraud conspiracy by his own children. I failed to verify the claims made to me, and in doing so, I defamed a man who survived an assassination attempt and spent 9 years building the evidence to prove it. I didn't need her apology, but I needed Vera to hear it, and Vera was 9 years gone. Chloe continued for another 6 minutes, laying out the security footage, the DNA evidence, the forged psychiatric evaluation, the unsigned documents. By the time she finished, I was back on the road, watching the sun drop behind the western peaks. I reached the farm at 6:15. Rex and Dusty met me at the door, tails wagging, oblivious to the fact that their existence had been used as evidence in a guardianship hearing. I scratched Rex behind his ears. The old dog was moving slower these days, his muzzle almost entirely gray. "Let's see what we missed," I said, pulling my phone from my coat pocket. 53 missed calls, 4 different numbers. Julian's cell, Brenda's cell, Connor's cell, One unknown number that was probably Preston's criminal defense attorney. Not a single voicemail. They couldn't even speak the words. I sat at the kitchen table, where Vera used to sort mail every afternoon, setting the phone face up in front of me. Dozens of text messages filled the screen. I read them chronologically, watching my children cannibalize each other in real time. Julian, 2:17 p.m. Dad, I tried to stop them. Connor was the one who sealed the door. I didn't know about the insurance plan until years later. We need to talk before you speak to the county attorney. Brenda, 2:43 p.m. Daddy, please call me. Julian forced me. I was scared of him and Connor both. Please, just you and me talk privately. I'll tell you everything. Connor, 3:09 p.m. Check the attached file. Julian's been cheating on his taxes for 6 years, over $400,000 in unreported income. I can help you if you forgive me. Julian, 3:52 p.m. Connor is lying. I have the original insurance documents with his signatures. He's the one who found the policy and calculated the payout. Don't believe anything Brenda says. She's the one who suggested cutting the power. Brenda, 4:31 p.m. I have recordings of Julian planning this. Voice memos from 2016. Please, Dad. I was 38. They pressured me. Preston had sent nothing. He'd probably already hired a criminal defense attorney and told my children to stop incriminating themselves. Not one "I'm sorry, Dad." Just "look what he did, and I can help you destroy her." 53 times they'd called. Not once in the 9 years before today. I set the phone face down and opened the cabinet above the sink. The bottle of whiskey Vera had given me for my 60th birthday sat in the back corner, still sealed. She'd written on the label in her careful script, "Only for special occasions." I poured 2 fingers into her favorite glass, the one with the etched wildflowers she'd bought at a craft fair in Buena Vista 30 years ago. Rex and Dusty settled at my feet with synchronized sighs. The kitchen was silent except for the clock Vera had wound every Sunday morning, its pendulum marking time she'd never see. 53 calls, I said to the dogs. Your mother saved this bottle for special occasions. 9 years ago, they'd left me to freeze in the dark. Today, they were tearing each other apart for scraps. I raised the glass toward Vera's empty chair. You were right about all 3 of them. The whiskey burned, going down smooth and expensive, and wasted on this hollow victory. By 11 that night, the phone had buzzed 72 times. I'd set it face down on the kitchen table beside Vera's whiskey glass and tried to ignore it, but the vibrations made the glass rattle against the wood every few minutes. Rex had given up trying to sleep and was watching me with those patient brown eyes that asked why I didn't just turn the damn thing off. Good question. I flipped it over. 3 more texts from Julian offering evidence against Connor and Brenda. Financial records, recorded phone calls, copies of emails discussing how to structure the insurance fraud. Brenda had sent a voice memo at 9:47. I pressed play. Her voice came through the speaker, thick with tears, telling me how Julian had controlled her for years, how she'd been terrified to speak up, how she was the real victim in all of this. Connor had sent another file at 10:30, this one labeled Brenda_mortgage_fraud_2020. The attachment showed loan applications with falsified income statements, Brenda's signature on documents claiming earnings she'd never made. Preston's attorney, a Denver firm I didn't recognize, had sent formal communication, requesting an immediate meeting to discuss resolution options before criminal proceedings advance further. 72 messages, not one apology, just cannibals fighting over scraps. I opened a new message window and added all 4 numbers to a group chat. Typed slowly, choosing each word the way Vera used to choose tomatoes at the farmer's market, deliberately, with clear purpose. 9 years ago, you left me in the dark with animals to keep this house. Tonight, I am in the house with the animals and you have nothing left to keep. The circle is complete. Do not contact me again. I read it 3 times. Vera would have made it shorter, probably just the last sentence, but she'd approve of the sentiment. Your mother always said actions speak louder, I said to Rex. These are my last words to them. I pressed send at 11:17. Then I blocked Julian's number. Watched the confirmation message appear, contact blocked. Blocked Brenda's number. Contact blocked. Blocked Connor's number. Contact blocked. Blocked Preston's attorney's number. Contact blocked. I held down the power button until the screen went dark. The phone's screen went dark, and 9 years of being someone's father went dark with it. I set it on the table beside the half-empty whiskey glass, and Vera's photo, the one from our 40th anniversary, where she was laughing at something I'd said, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that comes from 4 decades of choosing the same person every single day. They got one message, I said to her face in the photograph. You would have given them none. Rex stood up, stretched, and walked to the back door. Dusty followed. Come on, I said. Let's check the bunker door one last time before bed. Tuesday morning at 8, I met Garrick at his office. He had 4 sets of legal documents arranged on his desk in neat stacks, each one flagged with colored tabs marking where signatures were needed. Coffee was already brewing, the good stuff he kept for clients he actually liked. You're certain? Garrick asked, settling into his chair across from me. Once these go out, there's no walking it back. I picked up the first document, scanned the language. Eviction notice. Violation of land trust terms. 100% ownership confirmed under Vera Caldwell's estate provisions. I was certain 9 years ago when I woke up in that bunker, I said. Garrick nodded once. Then we proceed with everything. He added cover letters to each stack, slid them into manila envelopes, addressed them in his precise attorney's handwriting. Julian's address in Boulder. Brenda's address in Colorado Springs. Connor's address in Denver. Preston's law office in Leadville. The 50-year contract Elena negotiated makes the land legally untouchable for commercial development, Garrick said, sealing the first envelope. Even if someone challenged your ownership, the conservation easement would prevent any sale or subdivision. Good, I said. Let it stay farmland until I'm gone. Then let Elena's conservation trust have it. Garrick sealed the second envelope. Vera would approve of that plan. We drove to the post office together. The clerk, a woman in her 50s who'd gone to school with Vera, processed the certified mail without comment. But I saw recognition in her eyes. She'd heard Chloe's broadcast. Everyone in Lake County had heard it by now. 4 envelopes, 4 children, 4 doors closing forever. Back at Garrick's office, he pulled one final document from his desk drawer. This one was on Colorado State Department of Justice letterhead, a template he'd already filled in with dates, case numbers, and detailed evidence summaries. Insurance fraud evidence, he said, setting it in front of me. Forged signatures on the life insurance policy. False beneficiary claims. Financial records showing premeditation. I've named Preston Morales as the primary architect given his position as senior banker and the sophistication of the fraud structure. I read through it twice. The language was technical, precise, damning. $3 million in fraudulent insurance claims. Conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain. Elder abuse with intent to cause death. Preston's the one who structured it, Garrick said. The DOJ will focus on him first. His banking credentials make the fraud charges federal as well as state level. He signed the bottom of the form, dated it, slid it into a priority mail envelope addressed to the Colorado Department of Justice White-Collar Crime Division. Then he set down his pen and looked at me across the desk. Vera will be pleased. I thought about my wife winding the kitchen clock every Sunday morning, keeping time for a household that would eventually try to erase the man she'd loved for 43 years. She always liked things done right, I said. We walked out of the post office into bright December morning. 4 certified letters on their way to 4 people who'd tried to kill me. Garrick's phone buzzed as we reached his truck. He glanced at the screen, then showed it to me. Text from Thomas Whitfield. County attorney scheduling grand jury for January. Need Lester available for testimony. Charges likely attempted homicide, insurance fraud, elder abuse conspiracy. I looked at the mountains where I'd walked home through a blizzard 9 years ago. Same peaks, same snow, different man. Tell Thomas I'll be there, I said. The sign arrived on a flatbed truck 3 weeks after the hearing. I watched from the porch while two workers in heavy coats unloaded the wooden structure, 8 feet wide, professionally carved, mounted on steel posts that would sink 4 feet into frozen ground. Elena Townsend supervised the installation, checking measurements with a level and gesturing to adjust the angle by half an inch. Rex and Dusty sat at my feet, breath steaming in the December cold. The snow on the ground looked exactly the same as it had 9 years ago. Everything else was different. Elena walked up the drive, her boots crunching on ice cheeks pink from the cold. The Conservation Trust approved everything, she said. The sign goes up today. Your father said you designed the whole operation, I said. Elena smiled, the kind of smile that comes from completing something you started years ago. I designed the structure. Vera designed the purpose. The workers finished mounting the sign at noon. I walked down to the gate with Elena to see it properly. The carved letters were deep enough to last 50 years. Pendleton Animal and Community Rescue Station, founded in memory of Vera Caldwell. Emergency shelter available during severe weather. No one turned away. Pendleton was her maiden name, Elena said. Dad said she'd want that recognized. She spent 40 years making sure no one forgot where she came from, I said. Elena pulled a folder from her bag, the same kind of official document Garrick had been producing for 9 years. The easement generates $28,000 annually, enough to fund operations indefinitely. Heat power, veterinary supplies for animals, emergency provisions for people. It's self-sustaining. I touched the carved wood. The surface was smooth, professionally finished, permanent. My wife's name would be on this gate long after I was gone. There's one more thing, Elena said, flipping to a page flagged with a yellow tab. The operation terms registered with Lake County specify that the station is open to all community members during emergencies regardless of circumstances. 4 named exceptions are permanently banned from entering within 100 meters of this property. She read the names: Julian Caldwell, Brenda Morales, Connor Caldwell, Preston Morales. Exclusion enforceable regardless of weather conditions, she continued. If there's a blizzard and they show up at this gate, you're legally protected in refusing them entry. My wife's maiden name carved in wood, protecting strangers from blizzards while her own children were legally forbidden to seek shelter here. Vera would have made it 200 meters, I said. Elena smiled. Dad said the same thing. 2 months later, I met Garrick at his office. February snow was falling outside his window, the same soft flakes that had been falling the day I walked home from the bunker 9 years ago. He had 4 manila folders arranged on his desk in a neat row. The dominoes fell in order, Garrick said, settling into his chair. Preston first, then Julian, then the financial collapse for Brenda and Connor. You sound like you expected this, I said. Garrick opened the first folder. Vera expected this. I'm just watching her plan execute. He slid Preston's file across the desk. Department of Justice letterhead on top, investigation summary underneath. Insurance fraud charges. Falsified beneficiary documentation. Conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain. Preston's under formal DOJ investigation for the insurance scheme, Garrick said. He'll lose his banking license within 60 days. The fraud was sophisticated enough to trigger federal charges on top of state prosecution. He's facing 8 to 12 years. He opened the second folder. Julian's file was thicker, multiple legal actions stacked on top of each other like sedimentary layers. Julian's facing the Alpha Corp civil lawsuit for $1.2 million in damages from the fraudulent land transfer, Garrick said. Plus criminal investigation for the forged signatures. His real estate investments are frozen pending lawsuit resolution. He's liquidating assets to pay for legal defense. The third and fourth folders were thinner. Brenda's file. Connor's file. They lost their financial ally when Preston went down, Garrick said. Brenda's renting a studio apartment in Denver working at a department store. Connor's doing warehouse inventory overnight. Neither of them can afford attorneys for the criminal charges coming from the grand jury. 4 children, 4 folders, 4 separate collapses. No communication between them since the hearing. Have they tried to contact each other? I asked. Not according to phone records the county attorney subpoenaed, Garrick said. They're completely isolated. Each one blames the others for the exposure. He closed the folders and stacked them precisely, edges aligned. Then he looked at me with an expression I'd seen on his face a dozen times over the past 9 years, the look of someone who'd been let in on a secret and was finally allowed to share it. Vera set up the land trust in 2010, he said, 5 years before she died. She knew what they'd try. I felt something shift in my chest, not surprise exactly, but recognition. Vera sitting at our kitchen table in 2016 asking me careful questions about the farm's value, about what I wanted to happen to the land, when we were gone, about whether I thought the children would respect my wishes. She predicted all of this, I asked. Not predicted, Garrick said. Engineered. Every legal consequence they're facing now was built into the trust structure from the beginning. If they'd honored your ownership and left you alone, none of this would have triggered. But the moment they tried to force guardianship, the moment they forged signatures, the moment they approached Alpha Corp, each action tripped a legal mechanism Vera designed 5 years ago. He tapped the folders. The insurance fraud exposure, the corporate lawsuit, the criminal referrals, the financial isolation. She structured it so any attempt to bypass the trust terms would cascade into complete legal collapse. I thought about Vera winding the kitchen clock every Sunday, choosing her words carefully, planning 40 years ahead. She knew them better than they knew themselves, I said. Garrick nodded. She built a trap that only sprung if they tried to hurt you, and then she made sure the rescue station would carry her name when it was all over. I walked out of Garrick's office into February snow, thinking about my wife protecting me from 9 years in the future. She'd seen what I couldn't see, planned what I couldn't plan, made sure the farm would become something that helped strangers instead of enriching the children who'd left me to freeze. Vera Pendleton Caldwell, 43 years of marriage, 5 years dead, still keeping me safe. Thomas Whitfield called me on a Tuesday morning in January to say he was driving to Denver with enforcement documents and asked if I wanted to come along. I told him I'd stay home. This was law enforcement business, not personal. But it was personal. 9 years personal. Thomas had delivered bad news before foreclosure notices, arrest warrants, eviction orders. But he told me later that driving to Denver that day with 3 prohibition orders in his briefcase gave him more satisfaction than any official duty he'd performed in 23 years as sheriff. He described what happened at each door in detail that evening when he stopped by the farm. He went to Julian's apartment first, small rental in the suburbs, 2nd floor of a building that probably charged too much for too little. Julian answered the door looking 10 years older than he had 2 months ago at the hearing. His hair was grayer. His face was thinner. His expensive suit had been replaced with a t-shirt and jeans. Julian Caldwell, Thomas said, I'm here to serve an official prohibition order regarding property at Caldwell Farm. Julian's hand went to the doorframe like he needed support. My father sent you. The court sent me, Thomas said. Your father's at home with his dogs. He handed Julian the papers. Prohibition from entering farm property. Prohibition from approaching within 100 meters of the property line. Violations subject to immediate arrest. Julian's hands shook, taking the documents. Thomas drove 6 blocks to Brenda's apartment, a basement rental with a narrow window well and water stains on the concrete steps. She opened the door with red eyes like she'd been crying before he even knocked. He served the same prohibition order. Same terms. Same consequences. Can I just call him? Brenda asked, her voice breaking. Just once. He blocked your number, Thomas said. That's his choice, not a court order. Connor's apartment was across town, a studio above an auto shop that smelled like motor oil and exhaust. Connor answered. The door took the papers without speaking and closed the door while Thomas was still standing on the landing. 3 children who'd shared a conspiracy now lived in separate boxes, each waiting for the law to close in. Thomas told me he sat in his truck for 10 minutes after serving Connor, thinking about the message he'd been composing during the 2-hour drive from Lake County. Then he called all 3 of them. Julian answered first. "Come down to the hallway. I need to speak with all 3 of you." They gathered in the narrow hallway of Julian's building, standing 5 feet apart, not looking at each other. Thomas said it was like watching strangers who happened to share DNA. He'd rehearsed the message twice on the drive. Kept it simple. Kept it clean. "9 years ago, you locked a door from the outside to keep your father in," Thomas said. "Today, the law locks a door from the outside to keep you out. I hope you understand the difference." Brenda cried. Julian stared at the floor. Connor looked at the wall. "We understand," Julian said, barely audible. Thomas walked back to his truck and drove home. He stopped by the farm that evening to give me copies of the served documents, and I could see the satisfaction still on his face, the kind of expression a man wears when justice and poetry intersect. 1 month later, I drove to Leadville for supplies. First time I'd been to town for anything except legal meetings since the hearing. February sun was bright on the snow, and the mountains looked sharp against blue sky. People looked at me differently. Not with the curiosity I'd grown used to over 9 years, not with pity or confusion, or that careful distance people maintain around someone they consider damaged. This was respect, recognition, the kind of acknowledgement you give someone who survived something that should have killed them. The hardware store clerk nodded when I walked past. The diner owner waved from behind the counter. At Leadville Grocery, Harold Fletcher, who'd owned the store for 23 years and knew every customer's usual order by heart, rang up my groceries and then pulled the box of cat food off the counter before I could pay. "That's on the house, Lester," he said. I pulled out my wallet. "Harold, I can pay for my groceries." "I know you can." He pushed the box toward me. "But you're not paying for this. Not today." The town that watched me walk home through a blizzard 9 years ago now wouldn't let me pay for cat food. I carried the box to my truck, loading it into the bed alongside fence posts and a bag of rock salt. The parking lot was half empty, cold wind coming down from the mountains. "Mr. Caldwell," I turned. Harriet Davies was standing beside my truck, her old laptop tucked under one arm. "Mrs. Davies," I said. She held out the laptop. "I don't need this anymore. Files are wiped clean. Thought you might want it or you can throw it away. Either way, I don't need anyone to know it. I kept security footage for 9 years. I took the laptop. It was heavier than it looked, or maybe it just carried weight that had nothing to do with metal and circuits. "You saved my life with that footage," I said. Harriet smiled, sad and satisfied at the same time. "Vera would have done the same for me if our positions were reversed. She was that kind of neighbor." "She would have liked you, Mrs. Davies," I said. "She did like me." Harriet patted my arm once, then walked to her own car without looking back. I drove home with the wiped laptop on the passenger seat and free cat food in the back. The radio played low KLCO, cycling through oldies. Johnny Cash came on singing "Hurt," and I remembered Vera playing that song on repeat the week after her father's funeral, crying in the kitchen while she wound the clock. Through the rearview mirror, I could see Leadville getting smaller. The town had chosen a side 9 years too late. But they'd chosen. The rescue station sign came into view as I turned onto the farm road. Vera's maiden name carved in wood. Pendleton Animal and Community Rescue Station. The letters deep enough to last 50 years. For the first time in 9 years, I felt like I was driving toward something instead of away from it. Rex and Dusty were waiting on the porch when I pulled up, tails wagging, patient as ever. I carried the cat food inside, set the laptop on the kitchen table beside Vera's empty chair, and poured 2 fingers of the whiskey she'd saved for special occasions. The kitchen clock ticked. The dogs settled at my feet. Outside, February wind moved through bare branches. I was home. Rex couldn't make it up the porch steps without stopping halfway. I watched him that first week of February, moving slower each day, his back legs stiff on the wooden planks. 17 years old. That was 119 in human years. 9 years since the blizzard night when he'd saved my life. He was eating less, sleeping more. His spot had shifted from the porch to the kitchen corner by the radiator, where he didn't have to move far for water. When I called him, it took 3 tries to stand. "Take your time, boy," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "We're not in a hurry." He made it up one step at a time, pausing between each to gather strength. Dusty waited at the top. 9 years ago, this dog had saved my life. Now I got to return the favor by letting him age with dignity. Every night, I sat beside Rex in the kitchen, my hand on his back, feeling him breathe. The rhythm was steady but shallow. I remembered the blizzard night when he'd lain on my chest for 24 hours in that bunker, his body heat keeping me alive in negative 28 degrees. 120 pounds of loyalty pressed against my sternum, refusing to let hypothermia take me. "You did your part," I whispered. "I did my part. We're okay." His tail thumped once against the floor. 24 hours of body heat. That was more loyalty than 3 children had given in 69 years. "Good boy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "You've always been a good boy." Dusty started lying down next to Rex instead of on the porch. She was younger 15 to his 17, but she'd stopped going outside except for necessities. I'd find them together by the radiator. She'd rest her head on his shoulder. He'd sigh in his sleep. I brought them both food and water. Didn't make them move. "You're taking care of him now," I said to Dusty. "Good girl. 2 dogs. 0 children. That was my family now." Dogs understand loyalty better than people. They don't abandon each other when times get hard. They don't calculate insurance payouts or forge signatures or nail doors shut. They just stay. "You 2 saved me," I whispered one night. "I won't forget that." The snow started melting the last week of February. Water dripped from the roof. Ice pulled back from the edges of the drive. Elena Townsend arrived with a conservation crew and a flatbed truck loaded with young pine saplings. I met them at the western section, where Julian had illegally logged trees 7 years ago, leaving stumps and erosion scars. The crew unloaded 50 trees 2 feet tall, roots wrapped in burlap, each protected by a wire cage to keep deer from stripping the bark. Elena supervised the planting with precision, measuring distances, checking angles, making sure each sapling had space to grow. "These pines will take 40 years to mature," she said, kneeling beside a freshly planted tree. "You won't see them full grown." I watched her pack soil around the roots. Vera planted trees she knew she'd never see full grown either. That's what family land means. Elena smiled. The conservation easement protects them. No one can cut these down legally. Not your children, not Alpha Corp, not anyone. I looked across the western ridge where 50 young trees now stood in neat rows, their wire cages catching afternoon sunlight. Elena stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. She was quiet for a moment, then looked at me. "Don't you feel sorry for them?" she asked quietly. "After all, they are your own children." I watched the crew plant another sapling. Thought about that question for a full minute. "I feel sorry for the person I thought they were," I said finally. Elena tilted her head. "But not for who they actually are. How do you forgive someone for being exactly who they always were? Their real selves have been revealed for a long time," I said. It just took me many years to accept that truth. They showed me who they were when they were teenagers. Julian calculating every advantage, Brenda playing victim Connor, following the strongest personality in the room. I told myself it was a phase, that they'd grow out of it. That family meant something they'd eventually honor. I picked up a handful of soil, let it run through my fingers. "Vera knew," I said. "The dogs knew. I was the only one pretending. Elena nodded slowly. So it's not about forgiveness. It's about accepting who people really are. Forgiveness implies they deceived me, I said. But they didn't. They were always exactly who they are. I just spent 60 years refusing to see it. The crew finished planting the last row as the sun dropped toward the western ridge. 50 young trees that would outlive me, outlive Rex and Dusty, maybe outlive my children. Elena gathered the tools, loading them back into the truck. Vera understood that, she said. That's why she built the land trust 5 years before she died. Not to punish them for what they might do, but to protect you from who they already were. I watched the crew pack up their equipment. The young pines stood in their wire cages like sentries, roots already reaching into soil that would hold them for the next 100 years. Vera had planted her last crop, and it was truth. I walked back to the house as the sun set, Rex and Dusty waiting inside by the radiator. The kitchen clock ticked the way it had for 40 years. The whiskey bottle sat on the shelf, half empty now. Vera's chair remained at the table. The farm was quiet. The land was protected. The children were excluded. And for the first time since the blizzard, I understood what Vera had been trying to teach me all along. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who stays when the temperature drops. The Pendleton Animal and Community Rescue Station had been operating for 2 months when the first abandoned father arrived, February 2026. Light snow falling. The station ran on a volunteer schedule with heated shelter buildings, animal kennels, and temporary housing for isolated elderly during winter emergencies. Elena's Conservation Trust funded everything: utilities, supplies, veterinary care. In 2 months, the station had served 14 people and 23 animals. 14 people in 2 months. Vera would have doubled that number, found 28 souls who needed shelter, and somehow convinced them all to accept help. But we were doing what she'd designed, and that was enough. We're doing what she designed, I said to Rex, who barely lifted his head from his spot by the radiator. That's enough. The county social worker arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a white sedan with government plates. She helped an elderly man out of the passenger seat, 80 years old, if he was a day-thin coat and thinner frame, moving carefully on ice like someone who knew one fall could end everything. I met them at the station's main building entrance. His kids said they don't have space. The social worker said, her voice professionally neutral, but her eyes tired. Suggested we find him a facility. The elderly man looked at the ground. I don't need a facility, just somewhere warm until spring. I held the door open. We have a room ready. Come inside. The social worker left after filling out intake forms. I sat with the elderly man in the station's large kitchen, wood stove burning, coffee pot on the counter, windows fogged from the heat inside meeting cold air outside. He wrapped his hands around the mug I'd poured him. 3 children, he said quietly, not looking at me. All successful, all busy. They said winter is difficult for them, too many obligations. Maybe I could find somewhere else until spring, when things calm down. I listened, said nothing about my own story. Just listened. He looked around the warm kitchen at the wood stove and the clean counters, and the window with curtains Vera had sewn 15 years ago. I didn't know places like this existed. We didn't know either, I said, until we needed it. He nodded slowly, understanding something beneath the words. Your wife must have been a remarkable woman to build this. She was, I said. I was listening to my own story told by a stranger who didn't know we were the same. 1 month later, the temperature dropped. Late February night, the thermometer outside my kitchen window read -26 Celsius and falling. The Weather Service had issued a blizzard warning for Lake County: heavy snow, high winds, dangerous wind chill through Thursday morning. I sat in the farmhouse kitchen with Rex and Dusty by the radiator. Rex was 17 now and barely walked. The effort of crossing from the water bowl to his bed exhausted him. But he was still here, still breathing, still thumping his tail once when I spoke to him. 9 years ago this winter was the first blizzard I said to the dogs. Remember, Rex had been 8 years old then, young enough to lie on my chest for 24 hours and keep me alive through hypothermia. Now he was old enough that I carried his water bowl to him so he didn't have to stand. The station buildings were heated and ready. 3 temporary residents already safe inside, including the 80-year-old man who'd been with us for a month now and showed no signs of leaving. He'd started helping with the animals, feeding the kenneled dogs, changing water bowls, moving slowly but purposefully, like someone who'd found a reason to get up in the morning. I looked through the kitchen window toward the farm gate. Snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the ground in wind-driven drifts. The Pendleton Station sign was visible through the white carved wood letters catching light from the shelter buildings behind it. Under the public bus stop shelter 100 meters from the station entrance, 3 figures huddled in the falling snow. I recognized the body language before I could see faces. Julian's rigid posture, spine straight, even in cold. Brenda's hunched shoulders, arms wrapped around herself. Connor's hands jammed in his pockets, head down against the wind. They were looking at the farmhouse, at the warm lights in the kitchen window, at the Pendleton Station sign that read, "Founded in memory of Vera Caldwell. Emergency shelter available during severe weather. No one turned away." 100 meters. That was the exclusion distance Elena had written into the operation charter. Legally enforceable regardless of weather conditions. They could see the lights. They could read the sign. They could see smoke rising from the wood stoves, could probably smell it on the wind. 3 shelter buildings with heated rooms and empty beds and hot coffee on the counter. But not for them. Never for them. No phone rang. No messages arrived on the powered-off cell phone still sitting in my kitchen drawer. They knew they were forbidden. The legal papers Thomas Whitfield had served 2 months ago had made that clear. 100 meters. 9 years. 3 children. Zero mercy. I stood at the window watching them watch the warm buildings they couldn't enter. The thermometer read -27 now. The Weather Service predicted -28 by midnight, exactly the temperature from 9 years ago, when Connor had hammered 6 nails through a bunker door and driven away. 9 years ago, they'd locked me outside in weather like this. Tonight, they were locked outside by their own choices, by forged signatures and insurance fraud, and a conspiracy preserved in digital audio. By Vera's land trust, and Elena's legal precision, and Vernon Keller's gavel-striking wood. "Come on," I said to Rex and Dusty. "Let's check on our guests inside the station." Rex struggled to his feet, legs shaking. Dusty moved to his side immediately, letting him lean against her shoulder. Together they walked to the door, 2 old animals who'd survived one blizzard and were ready to face another. I pulled on my coat and boots. Through the window, the 3 figures remained at the bus stop, snow accumulating on their shoulders. The difference was simple. I was choosing to walk into the warm building. They'd chosen to stand in the cold 9 years ago, and that choice had followed them here. I turned from the window and walked toward the station building, where the 80-year-old man was probably reading by the wood stove, warm and safe, because strangers cared more than his children did. Behind me, through the glass, 3 figures remained at the bus stop in falling snow. The blizzard warning predicted -28 degrees by midnight. I didn't look back. Dawn came bright and cold, the kind of morning that erases everything. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee cup, wearing the coat Vera had mended 3 times over 15 years. The temperature read -22 Celsius, not as cold as 9 years ago, but close enough to remember. The storm had passed sometime after midnight, leaving the farm buried under fresh snow that covered everything in white silence. No wind, just sunlight and the sound of my own breathing. "You designed this morning too, didn't you, Vera?" I whispered to the air. Everything white, everything new, everything still here. The door creaked behind me. Rex appeared 17 years old, and barely able to walk, his back legs trembling with the effort of standing. But he followed me anyway, moving slowly down the porch steps, one at a time, until he reached the bottom and sat beside my boots. "You don't have to follow me anymore, boy," I said, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "You did enough 9 years ago." But he followed anyway. That's what loyalty means. Dusty came next, younger and steadier, lying down beside Rex so their shoulders touched. 3 survivors of the original blizzard together in new snow under morning sun that turned everything silver. "You two taught me what family really is," I whispered to both of them. I looked toward the farm gate. The bus stop shelter was empty. No figures huddled under the roof. No footprints leading away visible under fresh snow that had fallen after midnight, covering whatever tracks might have been there. I didn't know what that meant. Didn't know if they'd survived the night, found other shelter, called someone for help, or something else. I could find out with one phone call. I wouldn't. Their choices, I said to the morning. Their consequences, not my burden anymore. The Pendleton Station sign stood clear in sunlight, Vera's maiden name carved in wood that would last 50 years. Behind me, I could hear the station buildings humming with heat, ready to open at 8 a.m. for whoever needed shelter. But I was looking forward, not back. 300 acres of snow-covered farmland stretched ahead of me toward mountains Vera and I had watched together for 40 years. White and clean like a blank page. 50 young pine trees were buried somewhere under that snow, their wire cages protecting them from deer, their roots reaching down into soil that would hold them for the next 100 years. 300 acres of white snow, Vera's last gift, a blank page for the ending she'd already written. "You knew I'd need this, didn't you?" I said to her memory. Fresh snow, fresh start. Not revenge, not victory, just protection, just peace. I thought about the Pendleton Station operating behind me, heated, staffed by volunteers helping the 80-year-old man whose children had no room for him during winter, helping the next person who would arrive, and the one after that. This wasn't a revenge story. It never had been. It was a protection story. Vera had protected me 5 years before she died by building a land trust that would spring shut like a trap if anyone tried to hurt me. I'd protected myself by accepting the truth about who my children were instead of pretending they were who I wanted them to be. The station protected strangers who needed shelter, but not the people who'd proven they were dangerous. That wasn't cruelty. That was wisdom. There's a difference between helping someone and enabling them, between forgiveness and accountability, between love and permission to hurt you again. Vera understood that difference. She'd built it into every legal document, every clause of the land trust, every term of the conservation easement. Not to punish future crimes, but to protect against demonstrated character. The children had shown their character at 15, at 20, at 35. I'd just refused to see it until they left me in a bunker to freeze. Forgiveness without accountability is just permission to be hurt again. Rex shifted his weight against my leg, seeking warmth. I knelt down beside him, my old knees protesting in the cold, and wrapped my arm around his shoulders. Dusty pressed closer from the other side. "Some people will say I should have forgiven them sooner," I said to the dogs. "That family means forgiveness, no matter what." But I'd learned something in 9 years of silence and documentation and legal proceedings that ended with a gavel strike and a unanimous vote. Forgiveness without accountability is just permission for the next cruelty. I didn't forgive them for staying cruel. I forgave myself for staying silent so long. The difference is everything. Vera had forgiven herself years before she died. Forgiven herself for hoping they'd change, for pretending they were different than they were, for staying silent when she should have spoken. That's why she'd built the land trust in 2010. Not to punish them, but to protect me from the consequences of my own hope. She'd protected me from my own inability to see truth. And in the end, that's what love actually looks like. Not enabling, not pretending, not sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's cruelty and calling it forgiveness. Love looks like boundaries, like truth. Like heated buildings that help strangers and legal documents that exclude people who've proven they're dangerous. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking in the cold. The sun had climbed higher over the eastern ridge, turning the snow from silver to white gold. Behind me, the Pendleton station would open in 30 minutes. The 80-year-old man would probably make coffee. The animals in the kennels would need feeding. Volunteers would arrive to help. Ahead of me, 300 acres stretched toward mountains that would outlast us all. The rescue station, the land, the truth, all of it would outlive me. All of it would protect people I'd never meet from cruelty I'd learned to name. Rex struggled to his feet, ready to follow me wherever I went next. Dusty stood beside him, steady and loyal. 2 dogs who'd saved my life 9 years ago and stayed beside me every day since. I finished my coffee watching the sun climb higher. Rex warm against my leg, Dusty's breath making clouds in frozen air. I'd survived my children. That was enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this: family isn't defined by blood alone. I spent 60 years believing that being a good father meant always forgiving, always hoping my children would change. That was my mistake. I confused enabling with love silence with patience. Don't make the same error I did. Protecting yourself from people who hurt you isn't cruelty, it's wisdom. Sometimes the hardest lesson is learning that the people you raised aren't the people you thought they were. This grandpa story isn't just about family justice. It's about understanding that boundaries are love. The truth protects better than silence. I believe God allowed me to survive that blizzard, to show others you can seek family justice without becoming cruel yourself. Some say I should have forgiven sooner, but there's a difference between forgiveness and accountability. Every grandpa story like mine teaches one lesson: real family stays when the temperature drops. This grandpa story at its heart is about pursuing family justice while protecting yourself. Vera's trust protected the farm. The Lord brought her into my life to guard me even after she was gone. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have forgiven them or sought justice? Share this with someone who needs to hear that protecting yourself isn't wrong. And if you want more stories about truth, justice, and family, please subscribe to this channel. Your support helps these messages reach people who need them. Thank you for staying until the very end. I appreciate you being here with me. Remember, some parts of this story are fictionalized to protect privacy and convey the emotional truth, but the lesson about boundaries, protection, and real family, that's what matters. God bless you.